Hi everyone, my name is AJ. Welcome to The Money Store. This is a channel where we talk about La Luz del Mundo. This is a very niche channel, and today I want to do a redo of what could have been a much longer video. I want to do it much shorter. Today I want to read a chapter, one of the latest chapters written on La Luz del Mundo in an academic outlet. Um, it is part of an edited collection. It is by Donald A. Westbrook, and I can't wait to get into this with you all. I have a number of thoughts about it, but prior to getting into that, I will say that of course you got to like, comment, subscribe. You got to feed the algorithm. You got to please our digital overlords to help get this in front of the people that need to see it the most. Because I'm going to read this stuff all day long, and I'm deep in the weeds with it. But ultimately, I think my main intention is to create English language content to put out there into the world to help dismantle the church and dismantle the church, point at it in many different ways of many matters of criticism as possible, for the benefit of everybody. Because I don't think anybody's really benefiting from it. I think a very few select people are benefiting from this whole institution, and it is not the average person. So, of course, do all that, and we'll get this in front of the eyes of other people. Let me know what you think about this. Please reach out to me if you have any comments, questions, concerns, complaints, etc. And before any of this, before diving into this, I do want to say a number of things. My latest upload is a clip from a conversation I had back in August of 2024 with my friend Julian, and the clip was about Karen Reed and how Alan Jackson, the same person who was representing Nathan Joaquin from August of 2019 to right before any trial was going to begin in the summer of 2022. And Alan Jackson is still on board with defending Nason, although of course we haven't seen him or really haven't seen him show up in the court documents. But as of now, I believe it is still safe to assume that Alan Jackson and his colleagues are still representing Nason when it comes to him facing the federal case, and then also these other civil cases. Let me remind you, Nason pled guilty to state charges back in the summer of 2022, and in October of 2023, the federal government made an announcement that they were going to pursue Nason with more charges that need some further investigations. And it is now the summer of 2025. I'm still very shocked that we have not heard more from the federal government on that front. But insofar as I can tell, I think and firmly believe that by the end of this year we will learn more. I say that because number one, that when it comes to that clip on Karen Reed and what I was discussing in that video, Jackson was caught up in this whodunit murder trial, murder mystery of a thing. He was involved in this case close to where I live presently, and I was very surprised to find out that he was involved in this. And I found out about this in 2023. He helped Karen get a hung jury in the summer of 2024, and then now, late last week, I think a week ago, Karen Reed, had to undergo a whole other trial. It lasted a whole other 6 weeks or so, and the only thing that she got in trouble for was, not murdering her cop boyfriend, but rather for drunk driving, and there being rather firm proof for her drunk driving, and she's just in trouble for that. And it is a massive win for Alan Jackson and company. Of course, there are some strange La Luz del Mundo. There's some strange like La Luz del Mundo hype for Alan Jackson's most recent win, because number one, this dude's not a member. He's just defending the leader of the church, and even then, he didn't get to defend them all that well. Nason messed up that much that he couldn't help him actually going into trial, couldn't actually advise him to do that. And so now that this second trial with Karen Reed is over and she's only in trouble for drunk driving, Alan Jackson, his docket, his agenda is open, and that was one of the cited reasons for why the procedures with the federal government were delayed for some time. And so, given that he's done on this side of the continent, he's gonna at some point, I believe, have to return to the other side of the continent and answer for and represent and be on top of what's going on with Nason, because Nason's gonna want to continue to have his help. And again, there are these. I'm thinking of just one particular Twitter account that I'm aware of that has these fan cams and like fangirly type content of Alan Jackson helping defend Karen Reed. But these same sorts of people are not going to have the same kind of material for Alan Jackson when he's defending, say, Harvey Weinstein or um, Kevin Spacey, et cetera, et cetera. What have you. And so I want people to know that I have not uploaded in a long time, but I am aware of many matters and the moving parts, and that explains my most recent upload as of a month ago. That trial is now over. Karen Reed is only in trouble for drunk driving, and moving on. Another thing that I want to say is that last summer I made some announcements that I really intended on writing a book on La Luz del Mundo. I very intensely wanted to be it. Right now, it is about 100 pages long. I wanted to be upwards of like 500 pages. I don't think any of these stretches of choppy writing that I have are useful to share with anybody. But what I have been sharing over the past month or two are some resource lists that I've created for people that are curious about the history of the church and how the church has appeared in academic studies, and as today's video is going to discuss how it appears in its most latest study, and we'll get into that. But below, I should share two links to two Google Docs that I created. One is a exhaustive list of all the reports from Univision from 2019, and then up to the present day. It only goes to like November 2024, I believe. And Univision has its own page, has its own web page where you can look up La Luz del Mundo and find all the reports on it. But there are some things missing there, and there are some things that are included in those lists that are not really of any substance for our purposes. So again, I created this very long list with dozens upon dozens of articles, mostly authored by Isaias Alvarado, but there are some other names that will show up. And so, please share that please share that with yourselves. Use that as a helpful resource that I myself could not find on the internet. And so I think it is also helpful to take this sort of bird's eye view of all the headlines and across the dates that are present in this bibliography, in this catalog of Univision articles, because they've been the premier resource outlet. They've been the premier outlet for this, and I think that the web page as a resource is not the best, and I therefore wanted to make something better of it. Another thing that I want to share is a bibliography on La Luz del Mundo that I've created. It is books, articles, book chapters, et cetera, some unpublished dissertations, some unpublished theses, et cetera, that are on this list. There are no magazine articles or like web articles, because I think those would be a different list, and I just want to handle those later. I felt like these, putting forward these two things that I just mentioned are very important resources to have. And in the churches, you're not reading these sorts of things, but other people are reading these kinds of chapters, as we'll get into today. And I'm very much interested in diving into this. So I will begin to share my screen and discuss the book that we are handling today. So one of the latest, this is a publication titled Cult Rhetoric in the 21st Century. The subtitle is Deconstructing the Movement, the Study of New Religious Movements. The series is Religion at the Boundaries, and this one particular volume is edited by Thomas and Edward Graham-Hyde. The press is Bloomsbury Academic. They have offices in London, New York, etc. This came out in 2024. I have a digital copy of it here. I think it is not very. I don't think this volume is worth my time, and by that I mean someone else told me that they've read it, and I am not therefore too much interested in reading the rest of this. If I have this one impression of this one chapter here, which we'll get into right now. The person that shared that put this on my radar after I shared my LLDM bibliography, the person who put this on my radar was Virginia Beckett. And I had definitely known Donald Westbrook because if you go back to videos from last summer on this channel, I have two videos that are very, very long that discuss a journal of CESNUR, the Center for Studies on New Religions. I can't really remember what it stands for. We'll see that later. But There was a journal of Cessnood that came out in, I believe, 2020, and it basically discusses La Luz del Mundo, and I go through this material over the course of like 5 hours, dismantling a lot of parts of it that I think had to be addressed. And so thank you to Virginia Beckett for showing me this. And when it comes to this person, Donald A. Westbrook, they had a chapter in that Cessnood journal, and so they will cite that here and supposedly expand on it a little bit. And so I definitely want to go through this with everybody. This is chapter 7 in this table of contents. Here you have an opening by the editors. You have something on cult rhetoric. Obviously, QAnon shows up. The Branch Davidians show up at some point. Scientology may show up to another extent, but if this person, Donald A. Westbrook, should outright be known as just not being a member, and this is a person who has some sort of PhD in religious studies or something. I believe they teach over in California, and we'll learn a little bit more in their bio right here. But essentially, the chapter is like 9 pages or so, and I want to read the entirety of it, and we'll go a little bit through the footnotes. I have a number of things to say as we go through it. So let me read the biography here provided for Westbrook. Westbrook is a lecturer at the School of Information at San Jose State University. He holds a PhD in American Religious History from Claremont Graduate University and is the author of Among the Scientologists, History, Theology, and Praxis from 2019. Additionally, L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology Studies in 2022. Westbrook has taught at UT Austin, UCLA, University of South Florida, Cal State Fullerton, and the Fuller Seminary. So, of course, I'm not interested in reading the entirety of this book, but if you are, of course, let me know, and I could probably share this with you. Here I want to dive into the first page of this chapter. A number of things that I want to do is that I'm going to reference a number of videos that I've already done, and so I hope it is not interesting. At certain points, I may dive into a little bit of timeline and talk about sequences of events. And another thing I want to do, I'm going to really try to do, is read entire paragraphs here, and I want to read entire paragraphs because I want people to hear Westbrook in full. In other attempts in other iterations of this kind of video, I have butted in the middle of a sentence, and I may still allow myself to do that. But essentially, I have a lot of highlighting here and some comments off to the side. And again, this chapter is only really about 12 pages, around 10 pages, and it's not going to be such a slog to get through. Hopefully, if I read entire paragraphs. So let's start off with the title. The title is "The Light of the World: La Luz del Mundo, Liminality and NRM Studies, New Religious Movements." Here's the first paragraph. La Luz del Mundo, hereafter referred to as LLDM, is a Mexican-born new religious movement tracing back to the 1920s. According to J. Gordon Melton, it is the second largest religious group in Mexico after the Catholic Church and has grown significantly in the last few decades with population centers and temples around the world and claims of millions of members spread across 50 nations. Demographically outside of Mexico, it is most successful in the United States, and in particular in California and Texas. In the last few years, however, LLDM has gained attention in the media, both in and outside of Mexico, due to the imprisonment and conviction of its apostle and leader, Nason Joaquin Garcia, on charges of sexual abuse against minors. End of sentence. Garcia, who was arrested in Los Angeles, has been sentenced to nearly 17 years in prison to be served in the United States. LLDM, meanwhile, has expressed its continued support and allegiance to their apostle, who will continue to remotely manage the church through the through the duration of his incarceration. In fact, LLDM continues to maintain that their leader is innocent and honorable in public statements and in worship meetings, and to my knowledge, has not acknowledged any illegalities or apologized to victims in this case. First of all, this person starts off with some sort of rundown of what LLDM is. And Westbrook is going to, in the second sentence of his entire chapter, is going to say, according to J. Gordon Melton, it is the second largest religious group in Mexico. It absolutely is not. And if anything, it is kind of sus that this guy is going to cite someone that he has collaborated with, because J. Gordon Melton also showed up in that Sesnud journal from 2020. And you know what, just very objectively, like I don't think you need to say according to J. Gordon Melton that this is the second largest religious group in Mexico, because objectively LLDM is not that. And this book was published in 2024, and Westbrook, to my knowledge, has been writing on LLDM since 2020, and he's known about it since at least like 2019. He'll explain that in a bit. I bring that up because if you go to these citations to the bibliography of this chapter, in certain sources that he cites, websites, he has the notes that say, he has the notes explaining that some of these resources were accessed in April of 2023, sometime in 2023. And that is intensely important, because that is intensely important because this guy, you know, has to have some sort of has to be updated on things. It's just what I'm going to say very shortly. And so in the year 2024, it is very dicey and just suspicious that this person is going to cite someone else saying something in 2020 when that person themselves, I'm very sure, aren't and never provided any sort of Excel spreadsheet, any sort of tally or bar graph or nothing for the population of LLDM members. Nowhere in that Sesnuda journal will you find it. I really wanted to find that there. You cannot find it there. And again, in 2021, in early 2021, INEGI, the INEGI, basically the Mexican census, I forget what it stands for. The Mexican census in 2021 released a whole bunch of statistics, and we found La Luz del Mundo in there. And at that time, when they were counting in 2020 or so, they could only account for less than 200,000 members in La Luz del Mundo. And a quarter of those were people under 18. So, so take that how you will, swallow that tiny ass pill how you will, because the big pill that they're asking you to swallow here is that this is the second largest group in Mexico. It is absolutely not true. You cannot be the second largest religious group in Mexico with 200,000 people, according to INEGI, while Mexico has an actual grand population of like 130, 140, for sure over 100. The United States has like 350, 330-ish million people in it. And Mexico is about a third of the United States. And then, of course, the United States, took a fuck ton of land. And, that's what my history dissertation is on. From back in the 19th century. But, here in the 21st century, this guy, Westbrook, is just going to cite Melton as if he's the authority on this. And we're going to find more issues with that going on. Because, look, he cites Melton here saying this is the second largest group in Mexico. That's just not true, for sure. I mean, I'm not going to deny them that La Luz del Mundo has grown significantly, as he writes here, maybe in the past few decades. Okay. But then here, Westbrook, and to his credit, he's never going to say anything more than this. I think in this instance and later, he's going to say, La Luz del Mundo claims that there are millions of members spread across 50 nations. He never in this chapter says that La Luz del Mundo has 5 million members or more. That is what the spokespeople were saying in the summer of 2019 when the apostle got arrested. That's probably kind of still the only number that they can have the fucking guts and oomph to even push out in these days. But again, it's interesting. If this guy is writing as late as 2023, and when he writes about the plea conviction in 2022, so if this guy is writing as late as the spring of 2023. It is kind of baffling that this guy is still going to put out these claims that you put out the sentence that the church just claims that there's millions of members spread across 50 nations. Because number one, he didn't put 5 million members, so he probably doubts that number. I'm sure he heard it a fuck ton, and here he's going to doubt it, not put it down. That's okay, I guess, but it's still he's still not going to question it, right? But then also it's 2023, 2022 when this guy is writing, and here he's gonna put that the church is spread across 50 nations. Um, I thought it was 60. I don't remember when I first heard 60, probably for sure within the past 6 years or so, but I don't remember. I don't remember when I first heard that. Here, this guy is gonna say across 50 nations, and then like, but then also that's not so impressive because nations come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and the fact that they are spread across 50 nations is kind of just that they are just spread across. This number 50, 60, maybe at one point it was one, where La Luz del Mundo is just in Mexico. That number can be artificially inflated. Not way back then in the 1930s and 40s, for sure. Absolutely not. But like going into the 80s, the 90s, etc., the later years of Samuel, that number of La Luz del Mundo being spread in, single digits and then double digits of maybe dozens and dozens of countries, that can be artificially inflated and has been just for like a long time. Like everybody knows that number one, LLDM starts in Mexico, and it completely just did not dominate Mexico like at all. The I believe that like 200,000 people is like just less than 1% of the millions and millions of people that are in Mexico. Less than 1%, way less than 1%, right? But again, I give Westbrook credit for not putting 5 million members, and he's kind of like hedging it here, but then he's also, I'm sure like the LLDM wouldn't be opposed to see, claims of millions of members. I'm sure the leadership would not be opposed to hearing that. But then, shouldn't they also be opposed to this, to the way the sentence ends here, where it says that they're present in 50 nations? Is it not 50? I thought it was 60. If anything, that's the easiest number to count rather than all the other ones. Or do you guys just not know where people are in the world, where you guys have dispersed them? This LLDM diaspora can someone give Melton some numbers? Can someone give Westbrook some numbers? That's what I really want here. Moving on to this paragraph that you just read. I mean, for sure that LLDM is most successful in Mexico, and then of course in the United States, if we're not counting Mexico, in particular California and Texas. In the last few years, LLDM has gained attention because of the arrest of its leader on charges of sexual abuse against minors. I mean, thank you for saying that. Some other people may not say this, but at least he's going to put it up front. He's just going to front load some of these claims, and that just basically come out of the mouth of the church in a certain way. Garcia, who was arrested in Los Angeles, has been sentenced to nearly 17 years in prison. That's true. Nason will continue to remotely manage the church through the duration of his incarceration. And then here's just a very strange part that it ends on. He reads in the last sentence of his first paragraph. In fact, LLDM continues to maintain that their leader is innocent and honorable in public statements and worship meetings. Here, this guy is going to get so wishy-washy with who LLDM is. LLDM is a church, an organization, and it's a tree with just many, many branches. There are tiny, tiny leaves, a fuck ton of tiny, tiny leaves. And then there's a lot of big branches that are people at the higher echelons of the organization and the ministry, people who are sent to various countries, various continents to oversee the missionaries there, people that are missionaries in little local churches in bumfuck Indiana, or fucking some sort of remote suburb of the greater metropolitan area of Houston, far from all the other Houston churches. LLDM is a lot of things. There's so many layers to this, to the pyramid, but it should absolutely be not mistaken that the pyramid has a tip, Nason, and he's acknowledging it here a little bit here, and he kind of gets wishy-washy with it later. And then also there's a lot of other people, handlers under him, consiglieres, gross, collaborators around him. And I think Westbrook is, one of these people who's going to be at the tippy top, because he'll demonstrate that a little bit later. But here he's going to get very wishy-washy with who LLDM is. Here he says LLDM continues to maintain that the leader is innocent, but does that exactly mean that everybody in any given room, in any given congregation of any given age, is of the same mind? Do they all, toe the party line? Does this guy just show up in a room as a guest, not as a regular, and then just assume that everybody's on board with yeah, the church says that there's 50 countries, so everyone's in 50 countries, or yeah, the church says there's 5 million members, everyone thinks this. Yeah, the church believes this about the case, and so everyone else believes this. This guy leaves no space, no daylight for no sort of space for nuance, for doubt, for second thoughts or anything within the minds of individuals and within the minds taken in a whole under LLDM. I hope that makes sense. I think I'm done with this first paragraph. Well, actually, no, I'm not. So he also, ends this paragraph and he says, and to my knowledge, LLDM has not acknowledged any illegalities or apologized to victims of the case. Thank you for putting that up front. I mean, that's great, but also it's also really sus because there's actually been the church has actually started to and had to account for a lot of illegalities that have happened. Say maybe not Nason, but for other members where other people spoke up, given that Nason got in trouble, and other people spoke up about things that happened to them in their local churches, and people got in trouble. For example, in California and in Texas, which is where you're citing. This is where you're citing that the church is most successful, and it turns out that there have been other successful convictions on charges of abuse against minors, not by the leader, but by other people, to different levels, and in California and in Texas. So, yeah, that's where this guy is starting off in this first paragraph. Let's continue on. This next paragraph reads, the purpose of this chapter in a volume about cult rhetoric is to consider some of the ways in which LLDM has been marginalized due to its cultural status as a so-called cult, especially in Mexico and in the United States, and how this has affected church members and influenced the manner in which the church interfaces with outsiders. Rather than focusing on leaders such as the Apostle Nason, or for that matter, on anti-cult / counter-cult activists, I would like to shift attention to the ways in which the LLDM church and its members have responded to internal and external challenges. As such, the court case, incidents of persecution and violence, the COVID-19 pandemic, and in particular, its central religious ritual known as the Holy Supper, Santa Cena. LLDM is a new religion with an interesting global reach, but it also finds itself at a critical moment in its 21st century history. It is arguably large enough, and its followers apparently committed enough to weather various legal and public relations storms, but it is also clear that it is often operating from a largely defensive posture in its public relations and legal affairs, due in no small part to the lingering perception of the group as a cult, an accusation and label that has been with the group long before the arrest and conviction of its third and current apostle. So here he's going to lay out the roadmap for the rest of his short chapter, the sort of thesis of this, and again, let me repeat, here he's going to talk about how the church has been marginalized as a cult, how to sort of parse out the language for, should we call this a cult or something else? What do they want to be called? How do they view themselves? How do they view outsiders that are coming in to study them, etc.? And then he also wants to dive into how the church members, etc., have dealt with the fact that their leader got in trouble, the fact also that that there's been more scrutiny on the church. But then he also Westbrook wants to talk about how the church has adapted to, say even if the leader didn't get in trouble, the church, like any other church that met on a weekly basis, would have had to adapt to the COVID-19 pandemic shutdowns, health regulations, etc. And they did. And so, here he's going to talk about that angle too, which I think is, at least of some substance, if we're not going to talk about other things that this guy just isn't going to talk about. But he then also wants to talk about the Holy Supper and then how the Holy Supper has changed a little bit. I get that, that's fine, but again, he's gonna be very finessey here, and he's gonna be very sly, he's gonna finesse his wording here, he's gonna finesse his argument here by trying to put out the central heliocentric piece of the LLDM puzzle, Nason, who lies at the center of it. Everything revolves around him, right? He's going to put that up front in a certain way, talk about how it is that and how it has gone these legal challenges and whatnot. but then also he's going to immediately put it behind his back and pull something else out from behind his back and have you focus on that. He wants to have you focus on these other matters that I just laid out, that he just laid out. And I'm going to argue in this video that he does those kind of okay, not even really that well. And then also it is actually way more interesting what he was first discussing in that first paragraph. So that here in this paragraph, he's talking about his thesis as roadmap for the rest of the essay. And then as he says, LLDM is at a critical moment in its 21st century history. Yeah, absolutely. It is only a century old. It's not like it's been around for like a long time. So, it's not even a century old, right now. So it is kind of funny that here he's gonna say, I don't know. This kind of can imply that the church has been around for much longer than it has been. I'm gonna read this next sentence that again is very troublesome. Here he's just gonna be wishy-washy with who LLDM is. To him, LLDM is this sort of just this monolithic block. And here he says the church is arguably large enough and its followers apparently committed enough. Well, you should have investigated apparently a little bit fucking more, right? Because a lot of members did not weather the storm. They got out at various points, at the point of the arrest, at the point of the conviction, at the point of the COVID-19 pandemic, when they were locked up at home and not going to church, and that got them out of the routine of going to church. How about at the point of late 2022, after the conviction has happened and HBO drops its great documentary, right? How about also 2023, where various many more documentaries came out? How about October 2023, where apparently the apostle is going to face charges from the federal government. So here he's just going to be so wishy-washy with who he thinks is LLDM and what it means to weather the storm. A lot of people did not weather the storm. A lot of people are not committed. A lot of people are still waiting for other breaking points. A lot of people have gone through so many breaking points. A lot of people have lost family and feel a sort of sunk cost fallacy to stay within the group. So again, 2 paragraphs in, this guy is not really off to a good start, I would say. And this purple part, the church is operating from a largely defensive posture. He knows why, and he's just not gonna really entertain that a lot more. And I mean, of course, just it definitely is, operating from a largely defensive posture. Okay, so the next section is titled LLDM, New Religious Movement or Not. LLDM researchers have often approached the organization from the standpoint of Latin American history and within the religious context of Pentecostalism in light of the group's early history and its continuing liturgical focus on the Holy Supper. In the last few years, though, the apostles' arrest, imprisonment, and conviction has led to renewed interest as more academic researchers consider it as a new religion or new religious movement, even as it continues to be marginalized as a cult in popular culture. LLDM is almost 100 years old and has undergone a tremendous amount of change and expansion, especially under the leadership of its second apostle, Samuel Joaquin Flores. The Journal of CESNUD, in particular, has published a number of articles related to LLDM, including a piece by the author, Westbrook, Westbrook on fieldwork conducted at sites in Southern California. In many ways, this chapter expands on this earlier analysis and includes my reflections on attending a Holy Supper in Dallas, Texas in February 2020, and visiting the Houston Temple soon after an anti-LLDM shooting incident in July 2021. Okay, so I mean, I guess LLDM researchers have focused on the organization from the standpoint of Latin American history. I'm a Latin American historian. I'm a U.S. historian. I see that in the bibliography, but I see that in the bibliography, and it's great that he's going to cite some of these people, Nutini, De La Torre, but then he's also just going to go way back to Greenway in 1973. That's not good, and this is not the most updated work. There have been more works since this actually, and this guy just did not do his due diligence with studying this. For example, the first thing that I think of is a book by Daniel Ramirez titled Migrating Faith. And that came out in 2019, 2020. I'm not too sure. You go look it up yourself. This thing was just out there already, and this guy just never got to include it for some reason, right? And then Westbrook is gonna go on to say there's a renewed interest as more academic researchers consider it as a new religious movement. Okay. Even as it continues to be marginalized as a cult in popular culture. I mean, the church just is a cult, but okay, if other people are going to call it a cult, now that I'm, reading this chapter for like the third, fourth time again, I actually wonder what he even meant by popular culture here, because like just I don't know, he's just not gonna exactly talk about what the popular culture is. We'll leave we'll plant a flag on that and we'll move on. LLDM is almost 100 years old and has undergone a tremendous amount of change and expansion. Okay. Especially under the second apostle. Yeah, I agree. The Journal of Sesnud had a whole bunch of articles, and then this is like, okay. And so here he talks about how he has written already on LLDM, and he's going to expand on it a little bit. If you're interested in that, go look for, I'm pretty sure it's in the second part of a long videos that I made last summer. It is in the second part. So I'll continue on reading his next paragraph. Before proceeding, however, it should be acknowledged that LLDM is not particularly fond, as far as I can tell, of being labeled a new religious movement or NRM, given that the group views itself as a restoration of primitive Christianity. Indeed, on its official English language homepage, the group describes itself as a restoration of the early Christian church and a Christian-based faith. Its practices are based on the biblical teachings of Christian fraternity and solidarity, teaching respect for human dignity, equal treatment, and non-discrimination. Oh, okay, I'm gonna butt in here because I'm very confused by when he starts when he starts quoting, because I'm used to the Chicago style of citations and formatting. This is not Chicago. This is something else. Maybe I don't care. I don't care what it is, but essentially it is strange that this guy is going to start quoting. And is this like I don't know why this guy is going to quote with just two apostrophes on either end of restoration of early Christian church. Shouldn't just be the two hanging quotes on either end to bracket it off. And then look, there's this next part that he starts with an apostrophe, saying Christian based faith. And then does he not like quote it? There's just no end quote here, right? Like, I'm not crazy. And then I'm also interested in how um you don't even need to quote Christian-based faith. I think, restoration of the early Christian church is the thing you should quote. But then there's this other Christian-based faith. So, it's you don't need to quote that. And it's probably redundant to say such a thing. Its practices are based on biblical teachings of Christian fraternity and solidarity, teaching respect for human dignity, equal treatment, and non-discrimination. Again, here's another sort of so here's an apostrophe. And then, like, does he start this? Is there another apostrophe that I missed? Or does he mean to put this one and then it's like connected to this other one? I'm sorry for this tangent, but like there's not just, objective things wrong here, but there's also a lot of weird grammatical things that are going to happen here. And like I would just say that just barely any proofreading happened here. I think the only proofreading that happened here was that this guy put this in front of LLDM people and asked them if it was okay to put out into the world. Let's move on to that, because yeah, I'm going to be confused by these apostrophes here and there that are supposed to stand in for quotation marks. I'll continue. As such, it is similar to another North American-born religious tradition, Mormonism, and its largest institutional expression, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For LLDM's part, I assume that the NRM designation is at least tolerated or understood from a historical perspective, and in any event, is certainly preferable to the pejorative cult or sect. Moreover, LLDM has been discussed in sessions at CESNUD, Center for Studies on New Religions conferences. Shouldn't you have put what CESNUD stand for earlier? Because you mentioned CESNUD like in the previous paragraph. I feel like you should have spelled out what that meant here, right? And so I mean, we'll move on. There was a CESNUD conference at the 2022 meeting in Quebec City, where two church spokespersons, Big Valle Estrada and Jack Freeman, participated in a panel entitled "A Fast-Growing Religious Movement, a Global Charitable Network, and an Apostle in Jail," CESNUD 2022. So there's the CESNUD journal from 2020, and that is what he spoke about earlier. Then of course, there's a pandemic, there's all these shutdowns and all that. In the summer, I think in the summer of 2022, after Nathan took his conviction, he just there was this in-person conference that where they discussed what they wrote earlier, and then people answered. I don't know how many people were there. I don't know how many people were in the room or just what the discussion was or anything. I wish I knew more. I really wish I was there, but essentially here he's just talking about how he has written before, and he's going to and he is also coming to contact with spokespeople of the church to see if they to learn about the church. But here's what he learns though, because um it's kind of strange for him to say that for LLDM's part, I assume that they tolerate the label. Don't assume, because Big Valle Estrada, Jack Freeman. You're apparently talking to them. You've apparently been to little tours with them, for across a number of years, showing up with them at a conference here and doing another thing at another place. And so, I don't know if it's like, why do you say that you assume? Just say that it is or it isn't, because apparently you know them, right? And so, additionally, that like I understand what he's trying to say, what he's going to try to say here in a bit. But again, it's I don't know why you need to say assume, because you get into it later, and I mean just slap the label on them. You're the outsider, right? You're the outsider coming in. I think you have some sort of semblance of a right to just slap a label on them, and what they think of it. That's an interesting discussion. That's what's in the next paragraph. Let's continue. While the NRM lens is methodologically useful and certainly less value-laden than cult or sect, it is therefore inaccurate and misleading in the sense that it fails to fully account for the self-identifications of its members. It also helps lay bare perennial problems in new religious movement studies. Indeed, in the academic study of religion in general, concerning insiders and outsiders and the place of emic and entic analysis. Emic means insider, etic means outsider. Let me make sure. Yeah. How should a group such as LLDM be classified, labeled, and understood, whether on its own terms, in a comparative context, or based on a popular or non-technical understanding of what others within a particular culture or subculture perceive as cults versus real religions? Also, to what extent is LLDM new anyhow? Or is this ultimately a relative assessment, even within a relative assessment, even within new religious movement studies? After all, LLDM, founded in 1926, is relatively new or newer compared to its restorationist competitor, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, founded in 1830. But LLDM is also older than many other groups studied by NRM researchers, organizations and movements that tend to be quite younger than 100 years old. In the end, perhaps the point is that groups variously described as cults, sects, new religions, alternative religions, and the like, find themselves in a kind of double bind, a methodological no man's land in which neither cult nor new religion quite fits. But a group would typically prefer to be analyzed as a NRM than to be othered and dismissed, delegitimized, and denounced as a cult. This particularly explains why a group such as LLDM would seek to be better understood by NRM scholars and at a professional organization such as CESNUR, rather than seeking historians of Christianity or presenting themselves to, say, the Society for Pentecostal Studies. Neither pair of shoes quite fit, but the former are a bit more comfortable, and in the process helps build bridges with scholars who can interface with others in academia, and perhaps also the public, who might otherwise have no other source of information and be left with discriminatory and anti-cult stereotypes. So, I mean, here, this is why I said that I don't know why he says assume earlier, because I mean, you're just talking to the people already. And okay, so to go back to the beginning of the paragraph, he's going to discuss why it is kind of strange to apply troublesome to apply the new religious movement label onto La Luz del Mundo, because while that church has been around for 100 years, Christianity has not been around, has been around for just way much longer. And so the way that the church talks about itself and its self-identification is that it is a restoration of the original Church of Christ, and that the Church of Christ was around when Christ was around, and then it died off after he died. Like it died off very soon after he died, and then just for a very long time, just for centuries upon centuries, millennia upon millennia, There was no true church of God, and so they view themselves as the one true one. But like I mean, I'm not gonna, get very sophisticated here, but I'll just very sophisticated and thorough here, but I'll just straight up say that, like, just slap the new religious movement label on them because they have only been around for so long. And when it comes to them, saying that they're the one true church of God, that they're the one true church of God, that all the other ones are wrong, et cetera, et cetera. There's like thousands and hundreds of them still on this planet that kind of say the same things of themselves. Okay, maybe they don't all say that they're the restoration of this, that they're the second version of this, that they're the third version of this. Maybe not all of them say that, but this sort of self-identification is only to me, as my in my sense as a social scientist myself, I feel like um you should still be able to apply this label onto them, and whether what they say of themselves doesn't can only mean so much, right? Again, I will say that it's kind of strange that this guy is going to say that the church was founded in 1926, but way earlier he's going to say, with tracing back to the 1920s. I feel like you should just say 1926, right? Like I don't know why you gotta be like Parsi like this, and as you continue to write, because these sorts of things kind of trip people up, and you should just be right and better than the first time you say it. Again, here we have a number of quotations with single marks. I don't know if that's customary for him, but we'll see what's going on. Um, so I just completely disagree with him that the church should be seeking out NRM scholars, because apparently they're all trash. If they're going to be writing like you, and I think actually, yeah, historians of Christianity, or historians such as myself, or maybe someone from the Society of Pentecostal Studies. I don't know who those people are, but maybe, actually they may have something way more useful to say than what you have had to say so far, because, we'll get onto it here, but it's not like the church can pick and choose who gets to study it and not. They actually pick the people that they like to get them close and help launder their reputation, like what you're doing here, Westbrook, laundering their reputation, sort of normalizing them, trying to make them seem more popular and tame than they are. But when in reality, yeah, this isn't actually not just a new religious movement. It's a cult in its own right. Sometimes called the largest cult no one's ever heard of. And when it comes to the United States, when people think of Scientology, the Branch Davidians, Jim Jones's church, Nexium, etc. Nexium wasn't a religion, but like these sorts of cultic groups are kind of just popping off all the time, and like I'm not really too sure why it even matters that this church is only so young, and that they're going to say that we've actually been around for a very long time, but we've only just now had a reiteration here in 1926. I'll move on to the next segment. This is the Holy Supper, Dallas, Texas, February 2020. I'll read the whole paragraph. The Holy Supper, Santa Cena, commemorates Jesus's last meal with his apostles, and it is a central LLDM event. It is a main religious act, according to Massimo Introvigne, that usually takes place at the church's headquarters in Guadalajara on the 14th of August, the birthday of the first apostle, Aaron. Introvigne, who has been in Guadalajara to visit LLDM sites on multiple occasions, corroborated church estimates that the 2019 Holy Supper in Mexico, the last before the apostles' arrest and restrictions due to COVID-19, was attended by an astounding 600,000 members. Hold on. The 2019 Holy Supper is in August. I don't think I caught this the first time that I read. The dude got arrested in early June 2019, not after August 2019. And so here he's wrong when he says that this was the last before the apostles' arrest. That's not true. That was the first one after the apostles' arrest. If you're thinking about one, it's 2018, right? This is the last one before the restrictions of COVID-19. So this guy's wrong here, right? Let's move on. LLDM, we'll get back to this in a bit, though. LLDM members, known simply as brothers and sisters among one another, travel from all across Mexico for the annual event as a form of pilgrimage, and many adherents travel internationally, all to celebrate the Holy Supper and reconnect with others in an event overseen by the apostle. My own academic investigation into LLDM did not begin until early 2020, and after the church had been arrested, and after the apostle had been arrested in June 2019. Oh my God. Like here, like this sentence completely contradicts the previous one, right? And the church has so far been limited. Oh, and his academic investigation, he says, has been so far limited to fieldwork and trips inside the United States, in particular California and Texas. Again, my observations of LLDM life in California have been published and focused on visits to temples in Los Angeles and Long Beach. Is this dude just trying to like fill out the word count? Did he have extra space and he just needed more words? Because these last parts are like really redundant. But I'm glad he put them here because this sentence right here where he says the apostles' arrest happened in June 2019. That is true. This completely contradicts the previous one, because if the Santa Cena of 2019 took place on 14th of August, then you're wrong about this part in yellow where you say that this was the last before the apostles' arrest. No, it was the first one after the apostles' arrest. This was the last one before the restrictions of COVID-19, right? That started next year. But going back to the beginning of the paragraph, he says that the Holy Supper is the most important central LLDM event according to Massimo Introvigne. You're so stupid. My fucking God. Why do you have to cite Massimo Introvigne here? He's not a member. He's not a member, right? He's not a member, and you don't need to cite him. You need to cite Nason, right? Go talk to fucking Nason. Go talk to Big Vai Estrada. Why didn't you say according to Big Vai? According to Jack. Okay, so there's this part where he says that the Holy Supper is its main religious act is LLDM's main religious act according to Massimo Introvigne. Why are you citing Massimo Introvigne? That dude is not a member. That dude is not a minister. That dude is not Nason. That dude is not Estrada, who you spoke about earlier. That dude is not Freeman, who you mentioned earlier, right? Cite them. Why are you citing Introvigne? Is Introvigne the authority, apparently, right? If the whole thing is overseen by Nason, then cite Nason. Like, why isn't Nason or any sort of Casa Cultural Berea, right? Any sort of thing like that cited in this book? I think maybe there are, but still, like if it's going to be anywhere, it's probably just it's this part, right? So I truly don't understand why this guy thinks he can just butt his head in, crawl out from wherever he came from, and start talking like this when this is just not. This is not right. This is not the best way to write about this, right? And then of course, there's this next sentence where he's just wrong, and then of course he's going to talk about how he's just going to say that Introvigne has been to Guadalajara. So Westbrook didn't get involved with LLDM studies until early 2020. Okay, right? Sus, right? You're going to get involved then. And then this dude is going to talk about Introvigne saying that he's been to the Holy Supper in 2019. We read that article. We read that article on this channel. And nowhere in that article does Introvigne give, bar graphs, an Excel spreadsheet, a tally, a sort of a pie graph or something to account for all the people that showed up to the event. Because this guy, he's just going to say that he corroborated church estimates. I mean, the church has estimates. And then, like, what did Introvigne do when he was there? Because insofar as I can tell here, and as far as I can tell in the things that we have read from Introvigne before, which is basically everything he's written on LLDM, right? Everything he's written, insofar as we can tell, this dude, when he shows up to events, he's just going to stand on his tippy toes, look at the crowd, squint his eyes, get some shade for his eyes, and then just do like a head count of random people and just, somehow get to 600,000 members, right? And then look, if Westbrook is also going to talk about how this is the main religious act of the church, then like, why is there absolutely, in my note here, like I say, why is there absolutely no discussion or mention of how this main religious act is practically mandatory? Practically mandatory because, if you're going to take for the view of the members that like, oh, we're the original restoration of Christ and we're not actually a new religious movement. We've our first iteration was way back in the day, and there's been a long pause, of course, but we're back now. We're not a new religious movement. If you're going to if you're going to really, put a lot of emphasis on that, then you should put a lot of emphasis on the fact that this main religious act is kind of like abusive to certain extents in certain people's lives, right? Because this thing is practically mandatory because a lot of people, it's a again, like it's a renewal of people's contract or agreement with Christ for like Christ and God for like the next year, right? Um to remain part of the church and whatnot. And so, rather than doing the Eucharist on a weekly basis, they do it on an annual basis, like here you're explaining. But then, like, why don't way more people attend? Well, because you don't want to talk about that, because then you would have to talk about how this whole thing is practically mandatory for everybody to attend. Now, look, there are absolutely thousands and thousands of people, I think thousands, let's say, in the United States that are probably originally from Mexico, that live in the United States and cannot go to Mexico to attend the event and then safely return back to where they live in the United States, right? Like that's of course true, and not everybody can make it to these sorts of things. Some people get sick, some people have babies and they're bedridden, or anything like that, right? There's a lot of exceptions, but it is absolutely astounding that this guy is going to mention that there's 600,000 members, say that he's gonna cite the way Massimo Introvigna eyeballed it, and then Introvigna is just gonna say, yeah, I corroborate the church estimates, which of course they fucking eyeballed it too, right? And so, like, I don't understand why this dude is gonna play like sloppy with the numbers. Be a little more strict, or way more like um critical of the numbers here. Squint your eyes at this. Lean your head over at this to observe this, because again, Westbrook does not say explicitly that there are 5 million members in the church here. He does not say that in this chapter. Maybe he says that in the previous thing he wrote, from 2020, but here he does not say it. But look, if there's millions of members, and let's just say that there's 5 million members, like the church is going to practically want to say, and how, if push came to shove, Westbrook would just, get on his knees and just admit that there's, toe the party line that there's 5 million members. If there's 5 million members worldwide, and then only 600,000 attend this one main religious event, really a very mandatory one, then that is barely over 10% of members around the world, right? Not everyone can attend, but goddamn, shouldn't this number be way higher? Way higher, right? Let's continue on. On 14th of February 2020, I had the opportunity to attend a Holy Supper at the Dallas Fair Park. Unlike previous years with Holy Supper activities traditionally in and around Guadalajara, festivities in 2020 were distributed around the world, and the US-based ceremonies came at the invitation of the apostle. In the United States, 6 locations were chosen based on church demographics for the February 2020 event: Washington, Dallas, Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, and Chicago. This decentralization was due mostly to the apostles' imprisonment, including his presence in Guadalajara, but also the emerging COVID-19 pandemic, which limited travel and the logistics required for a single large event. It must be remembered that at that point, in early 2020, in February 2020, the outbreak of COVID-19 had not yet led, at least in the United States, to mass shutdowns and the closures that would ensure in the coming months. That's true. Thank you for mentioning that. This is the end of this paragraph. Here he talks about, the February 2020 Santa Cena that he attends in Dallas, and like he's gonna say, unlike previous years with Holy Supper activities traditionally in and around Guadalajara, festivities in 2020 were distributed around the world, and US-based ceremonies, which came at the invitation of the apostle. That's not true. Like in previous years, there have been other Holy Suppers that have happened that did not happen in Guadalajara. For example, in that same state of California, in San Bernardino, in February 2018, there was a Santa Cena there. And I don't know if there was maybe other coinciding Santa Cenas that same day in like Central America or somewhere else, not Mexico, but that has happened already in the United States. Let me remind him also, this newcomer here, Westbrook, that in February 2015, just a few months into him coming into power, Nelson Joaquin had a number of Santa Cenas around the world, maybe around the United States, simultaneously for sure, in different cities. Houston was one of them, where he's talking about how, but where there was a whole Santa Cena in 2015, that had happened before, right? Additionally, there have also been Santa Cenas in Samuel's years, especially in the later years. I remember some happening in like a November, maybe in like 2011 or 2012. I think I remember one happening in November in the United States, in Houston. and maybe other places too. I remember one. I remember others from when I was younger, where an entire family, where the entirety of a family was not invited, but only like say the woman or say the male of the family was invited to a church gathering in Guadalajara. I remember those too. So there have actually been a lot of exceptions in the past. For sure, they've all traditionally happened in and around Guadalajara, but these things happening in 2020 like this is not the first time. And then like of course this guy's just doesn't know anything, right? So um this decentralization was due most obviously due to the apostles' imprisonment. Okay, I mean, why did they have to do that? I don't know why, but apparently they did it, right? Um, but then there was also the emerging COVID-19 pandemic. I actually highly doubt that well, actually, no, I don't really highly doubt. I remember discussion of in early around that time where people were saying that the church should not be holding these large events. And that was kind of true and actually downplayed them. But then ultimately, you know, the shutdowns really started to happen in mid-March. But for sure, but you know, by the beginning of March, and in the United States and in Mexico, elsewhere around, you know, this part of the planet. And so it is um I guess travel and logistics were limited to a certain extent, but then also that you know these Santa Cenas don't just happen out of nowhere. They there was there must have been some sort of window of time that they had to work with, and they just you know did it. I guess they you know they just did it then, right, on the 14th of February. And again, it is true, you know, by February there was no outbreak yet and shutdowns. Here's the next paragraph. Viva Estrada, head of American Public Relations for LLDM and then pastor of its Houston temple, invited me and a number of others, including NRM researchers J. Gordon Melton and Holy Folk, to the Dallas celebration. Most LLDM members speak Spanish and attend services in Spanish, as was the case in Dallas, where the vast majority of worshipers, in the low thousands, I would estimate, celebrated the Holy Supper together in the main rented indoor space. Estrada is somewhat rare in the church because he is bilingual and pastors to an English-speaking congregation. He has served English-speaking members in Hawaii, California, and Texas, among other locations. For academic research, Estrada was the main point of contact and helped interpret prayers and songs as they unfolded over several hours. English-speaking members, or those who preferred an English service, worshipped in a separate and somewhat smaller space, but one that was still packed with brothers and sisters, at least several hundred, by my estimate, with hundreds more Spanish speakers scattered across the rest of the complex in the large meeting hall. The high point of the Holy Supper came with the breaking of bread and the drinking of grape juice. Alcoholic consumption is prohibited in the group. Okay. Just mention other things, you know, if you're going to mention that, right? Similar to other Christian groups that celebrate the sacrament of the Eucharist and its variations on a weekly basis. In LLDM, though, it must be remembered that the Holy Supper is typically an annual rather than a weekly celebration, highlighting its soteriological significance, as well as the sociological opportunity for members from different regions to reunite. Now, look, Estrada got mentioned earlier, and I don't know why this guy Westbrook didn't give Estrada like a greater, you know, this introduction in the way that he did earlier, right? Same thing for Freeman. You know, you mentioned Freeman much earlier. You're going to talk about him way later, Westbrook, and so I don't know why you don't introduce them more fully here, like you do the researchers, J. Gordon Melton and Holly Folk. You introduce them right as researchers, but again, it's so it's we'll get to Holly Folk later. We'll get to J. Gordon Melton a little bit later too. But it's so baffling that this guy goes to the event in Dallas, and you know I don't doubt that he gets there, and it's easy to eyeball that there's people there in the low thousands, I would estimate. But look, if there's Holy Suppers in 6 cities, and it's like in the low thousands in 6 cities, say 10,000 in 6 cities, that's like 60,000 people in the United States attending these events, or say maybe there's like 50,000 at these 6 locations, and it's like 300,000 people. I don't know. You know, again, this guy's just estimating, just like Introvigne is estimating, and just like Introvigne is corroborating the guesstimations of LLDM itself, right? So you know, no one's providing any numbers. I don't doubt that there's thousands of people at this thing, but like no one's providing any numbers at this main rented indoor space, and like no one really cares here about about how large the church is ultimately, right? Um, this sentence is interesting where he says Estrada is somewhat rare in the church because bilingual. There's kind of that's not really that rare, right? And even then, if you have him for as the main point of contact for your academic research, again, why are you citing Introvigna earlier? Why are you citing him? What does he do? He's not a member. His articles are trash. His articles and like the Journal of Sesnud on LLDM, that version is trash too. You know, I don't know why Estrada isn't writing these things, right? Like if Westbrook is gonna sound like this, you know, a stenographer for the church practically that doesn't believe, or he's not really talking about so much about his beliefs, right? But he doesn't sound like the most uh like the most dedicated member. But still, if Estrada is going to be the main point of contact to interpret prayers and shit and songs for you, then why isn't he being cited where Introvigna is being cited earlier, where you're talking about the Holy Supper, right? And then look, there's the English speaking service, and then there's Spanish. There's mostly Spanish speakers at this thing. He goes to the English speaking thing. There's at least several hundred there by my estimate. Again, just just estimates. I'm okay with like several hundred estimates here, a couple thousand that you estimate here, but again, when you get to the fucking ridiculous, numbers that Introvigna has 600,000 at the 2019 Holy Supper, then that just leads you to believe that Introvigna was on a drone the entire ceremony, counting, looking down and counting people and across every street, radiating out from the LLDM temple, and then going over to the other neighborhood and going to the other neighborhood to go count, right? So again, I guess estimates are fine in these low numbers, but when it comes to these other things, it's kind of like, who's right here? I really, no one should be taking any of these things for at face value. Let's go to the next paragraph. There are relatively few studies on LLDM, and aside from a handful of essays and reflective pieces from NRM scholars in recent years, much of the existing literature from scholars and certainly from journalists tends to approach the group from a degree of suspicion or outright prejudice in a matter apparently tainted by anti-cult rhetoric and assumptions. Perhaps the most recent and conspicuous academic example, at least in English, is Hugo and Jean Nutini's 2014 book, Native Evangelism in Central Mexico. They discuss LLDM at length, referring to it as a destructive sect, and basically a theocracy geared to the exploitation of the faithful under strict control. On the subject of the Holy Supper, they acknowledge but are ultimately dismissive of its religious and social value, and instead focus on the festivities and ritual in economic rather than spiritual terms. It is the central ritual ceremonial event of LLDM, but also a very important economic event, the collection of the tithe and the opportunity to present the apostle with special offerings, cash, cars, and other worldly goods, end quote. This is followed by a superficial and astoundingly dismissive treatment of prayers, psalms, and sermons, and even the interjection that, quote, the experienced researcher of Protestant and Catholic manifestations of Christianity cannot help but wondering how this egomaniacal sect came into being. The authors conclude that, quote, the Santa Cena, in short, is the embodiment of the cult personality that fundamentally characterizes the top leadership of a destructive sect. Now look. I have Nutini's book, the two Nutinis here. I have their book from 2014. I have not read it in full, but given that I've read this from you that you're citing here, I think they are much more in line with studies with how I think the study should be than how you are, because I mean, it's just true, and like it doesn't really matter that they're dismissive of the things if they come to these conclusions, because you are not even dismissive or questioning the numbers, the objective facts that the church is kind of putting in front of you before you get to the prayers and the songs and the ceremonies and all that stuff, right? So when it comes to Nutini's book here, I should read it very soon. I have it on the docket. It is part of the bibliography, but I have understood it as being a book that is not going to be as troublesome as this piece of writing that Westbrook has here is. And then look, I agree with Westbrook when he says that that the Santa Cena is important. is important to the church, and that it is not necessarily an economic event for the church. But look, he's going to a Santa Cena in Dallas, where this is not the Hermosa Provincia neighborhood where you leave the church and you're surrounded by hundreds of people selling food and tours and souvenirs and other services and goods, right? Here he's going to a Holy Supper in Dallas, and excuse me, if you went to a Holy Supper in Guadalajara, like a lot of other people have been for a longer duration of time than just like a day or two, which is what these events last when they're remote like this. When it's in Guadalajara, it's a whole week. And there, if you do go to that, you would understand and see that it is very clearly an economic event. Now, look at the Santa Cenas. The church is not asking for offerings and money and all that stuff, but at other and then not at every consecration and every church meeting in the Santa Cena weeks do they ask for money, but at some of these they do. At some of these they do, and then also an intensely interesting thing to know is that forget the official money that's being delivered. How about when all the ministers gather at these Santa Cenas in August and February, wherever they may be, when all the ministers gather and are there for like a long time, that is very clearly, they're very clearly having budgeting conversations and are delivering money from one to another, right? It is not the case that the Santa Cena is not an economic event. It is not that totally, but it is certainly is that to some extent. And this guy is just not going to talk about how it can be in the ways that Nutini talk about. They know more here apparently than you do, because then also the Santa Cenas way back in the day, they were held on Aaron's birthday on the 14th of August, right? And that coincided with the presenting of gifts and other things to him. I want to learn more. I want to learn a lot more about that. But of course, like later on, when it's the Samuel years, especially 50 years, that's half of the church's history, right? Half of the church's history. I'm pretty sure most of the Santa Cenas there are happening on the 14th of August, because that's when Aaron had it on his birthday, right? He just had it on his birthday, and it just kind of stayed that. Samuel kept it there. And then Samuel was, of course, making the 14th of February, Samuel's birthday, his own birthday, a different celebration. He made that a different celebration. And then here he's not going to talk about how the 14th of February is Samuel's birthday. I don't think he's mentioned that here before. So I think that's all I had to say on this paragraph. We'll continue on. Jack Freeman, another spokesperson for LLDM, who, like Estrada, pastors an English-speaking congregation, was interviewed in connection with the February 2020 Holy Supper celebration in the Los Angeles area at the Pomona Fairplex. Freeman, clearly used to handling misconceptions about the church, addressed cultic stereotypes about the celebration, and in particular, the idea that members worship the apostle. Quote, okay, he has one quote here. Quote, "The world's already made a decision on who we are," Freeman explained. "They call us a cult. They call us violent. They call us brainwashers. They call us so many different things. But right here, we're in our biggest event. And we're just happy here. We're joyful. Nobody's forced. We're here on our own free will because we want to be part of this." Indeed, certainly in Dallas, the mood was a mix of celebration and reverence, and quite often often quiet and emotional, depending on the stage in the service. On many occasions that evening, brothers and sisters separated as customary by gender, see the figure below, could be seen praying aloud, even crying as a given pastor spoke to the crowd. They were joyous, exuberant, animated, quite often with hands outstretched in front of their chest or lifted up to the ceiling. In many ways, that reminded me of meetings in any number of evangelical and Pentecostal churches. I mean, here he's going to quote Freeman, who, again, is a spokesperson for the church. Like there's a difference between the church members, the ministers, the super duper higher ups, the council of bishops, right? And the lower level people who are average members who have no position of leadership or responsibility or anything other than them continually attending these events and listening and obeying, right? Here, there is absolutely no discussion from Freeman about how this event is mandatory, is spiritually mandatory. Excuse me, but like I feel like that's an important piece that would help to explain why people are crying and with hands outstretched and joyous and exuberant and whatnot. But then, of course, also it's like just the fact that you see people doing these things, as you have seen in any number of other churches, that doesn't really mean anything because you're just all taking them at face value and monolithically assuming that everybody in the room is just on board with the event. Is just on board with the event. They believe 100%. They believe in the false narrative, in the false. They believe that Nason is being framed. They believe everything coming out of the lawyers' mouths. They believe everything coming out of the Council of Bishops' mouths, Estrada, Freeman, etc. Right? So this he's painting the picture here, but it's also like you're not. He's tracing. He just sounds like a stenographer for the church here, where he to the outsiders is not talking about how this ceremony is super duper mandatory, and you're actually spiritually in danger and could go to hell if you don't attend this thing, and you have the opportunity to attend this thing and you don't attend it, right? And then he's also just not going to talk about how this like kind of and sorry, he does talk about this, but it's very amusing that this person is going to talk about what he sees here and how he thinks it's just kind of like any other thing. Because again, La Luz del Mundo is so hardcore focused and anal about how unique it is and how different they are from anything, and that they're going to reject the new religious movement label for these reasons because of their self-identification. And despite a lot of other people that are not LLDM members, Westbrook not included, being able to talk about the group in a very good way, even though they're not members, that is not being introduced here. And so again, this guy's just going to sound like a stenographer for the church here. And then when there's moments like this where he says, this church kind of reminds me of any other fucking boring meeting I've been to, right? So it's kind of amusing that he does that too. One refreshingly nuanced perspective on the Holy Supper comes from Patricia Fortuny in 2020, an anthropologist in Mexico who wrote a chapter on her observations in Guadalajara in 1999 and in 2000, drawing on a Durkheimian approach and extensive field work. Fortuny analyzed the sacrifices that members took to make the pilgrimage, the transnational activity, to Guadalajara under the church's second apostle, Samuel, and was far more value neutral. But Fortuny was. In her analysis, as she took into account the vibrant and spiritual experiences of the brothers and sisters observed. Here we'll read the quote that he pulls from Fortuny. The atmosphere in the streets surrounding the temple was pervaded with a collective, ecstatic, religious devotion. I saw women falling into a trance and many others just crying loudly or silently, and people presenting were overjoyed with the ceremony. We saw a couple of young women who had collapsed in the temple being carried by two male members to the emergency center. Believers from multiple locations get together in Guadalajara to participate in a common sacred meal, which revitalized their bond. Their bond to what? Okay. The act of consuming the sacred meal allows them to remake their kinship as parts of the body that made the same flesh and blood. Samuel, the apostle, constitutes the centerpiece of this ritual. The emotions aroused by him in the faithful do not parallel any others. The intense feelings produced by the presence of their living apostle are strengthened by the intimate relationships existing between people who are aware of sharing them. So look, if we go earlier, he's going to talk about, here he's talking about Fortuny. He says he likes this analysis of the Santa Cena from back in 1999 and 2000. Because he thinks that it is far more value neutral. Now, look, I agree. There are some times where Fortuny is writing, and I really wish that she was grilling La Luz del Mundo a little bit more than she is. And not in all of her writing, she is not wrong and bad, but she is not as consistently on the ball as someone like René de la Torre is, who is cited here, but is not going to be quoted here, right? Like Westbrook is going to want to quote Fortuny here. And again, like Fortuny is not a member. Fortuny is clearly an outside academic coming into the picture in 1999 and 2000, right? And here, this guy is going to make no mention maybe he could, maybe he couldn't, honestly. Given who he's collaborating with, maybe he couldn't. He's going to make no mention of how Samuel got in major trouble in 1997 over the same sorts of things that Nathan ultimately was charged with, pled guilty to, is serving a sentence on. This guy's not going to mention this. But look, if Fortuny is value neutral here, then so be it. She is, but that's not that's not a lot. That doesn't amount to too much, because here she's just describing things she saw. Like, I don't doubt that these things happened, but it is so amusing and tickling even that this guy is going to talk about how this guy, sees that Samuel is the centerpiece of the ritual. But then, like, earlier, when you first started talking about the Santa Cena, you're saying Massimo Introvigne, and you're citing him. No, go cite Samuel, go cite Nathan, go cite them. They have written and eulogized and spoken and have been recorded ad nauseum on what the Santa Cena is. Go cite them. Don't cite Introvigne. But then look, when it comes to this thing here, Fortuny is talking a little bit about how members revitalize their bond, but then, like, their bond to what? There's the common sacred meal. They remake their kinship with what? With, like, God and Christ. Okay, right? But, like, Fortuny is talking about it a little bit here, not all that well in this quote, but Westbrook should be the person who is discussing how this ceremony is mandatory, and the fact that it is scattered in all these churches, and that there's adaptions, and it's going to continue on no matter what. And now that sometimes the Santa Cenas are in February and in August in any given year. So this dude is not talking about how it's mandatory, how it's practically mandatory, and it is intensely troubling that this guy is just going to write in the way that he does right now, right? I'm going to keep reading from him. I, too, observed the kind of individual and collective religious energy or effervescence described here, although no one to my knowledge fainted during the ceremony. A more striking difference, of course, is that the current apostle, Nason Joaquin Garcia, was absent due to his imprisonment. However, there was a powerful moment during the evening when, much to the surprise of everyone gathered, a phone call from the apostle came through and was broadcast live to the faithful in Dallas. The apostle spoke in Spanish, and his words were translated along the way by our guide, Estrada. So look, Westbrook doesn't even speak Spanish. Whatever. In the short message, the apostle welcomed everyone, expressed regret for not being there in person, spoke about his spiritual bond with brothers and sisters, and emphasized the importance of the Holy Supper in their spiritual life. Members were visibly moved on an emotional level, led by the apostles' call and presence among them, even if remotely, and this was all the more meaningful due to the church's collective sense that his imprisonment was and is unjust. That's the end of this paragraph, right? And so, I mean, here off to the side, I wrote, so just everyone in any given room is on the same page, right? Just everyone subscribes to the doctrine, everyone subscribes to the narrative that these are false accusations against Nathan. Everyone subscribes to the official church narratives, right? Like this, yeah, of course the call came in. I don't doubt that. I've heard it. I know it, right? But here he's just gonna assume that just everyone in any given room is on the same page. And he's already spoken like this earlier. He just continues to talk like this. And I mean, no one fainted to your knowledge? Well, shit, I don't know. Were you really not on your tippy toes looking at everybody, guesstimating everything everywhere, right? You probably should. If anyone's going to know that someone fainted, it should be you. But look, you're not even so concerned with actually having some count here and then, corroborating with counts of other people from other events. And so, I'm not surprised that you, to your knowledge, didn't see anybody faint. I would hope you helped them too. Despite his absence on a physical level, the apostle was still very much in control of his church, in control indeed, and deeply respected by members at the Holy Supper in Dallas. At the same time, pushing back a bit on characterizations from both Fortuny and the new teenies, the fact that the event was successful without the presence of the apostle evidenced the evidence the extent to which the church has been able to adapt and survive in the face of change and perceived persecution. The apostle will continue to remain in prison for years to come, requiring others to fill his traditional role at the Holy Supper. Perhaps he will continue to make himself available remotely, whether by phone or a video conference call, or participate in other ways, such as sending statements or pre-recorded messages. In any event, the success of the event in Dallas and other since supports the view that LLDM will likely continue to adapt the timing and logistics of the Holy Supper as it is held in and outside of Mexico. It also underscores, I think, a theological observation that seems to have been missed by other researchers who focus in inordinate sociological and psychological attention on the role of the apostle, namely that the apostle is the present-day messenger, but through whom members ultimately connect directly with God through the saving power and love of Jesus Christ in accordance with LLDM restorationist beliefs. The apostle is also the leader of the restored church, and that church is the organizational means by which this reality is brought about for members. But ultimately, the relationship is between brothers and sisters and God directly. And on an experiential level, this is evidenced by the many ways that individuals pray silently or express themselves in verbal ways that sometimes include speaking in tongues. LLDM spokesperson Jack Freeman put the point this way when thinking about the apostle, in a way that once again seeks to counter rhetoric and perceptions about a possible cult of personality and adoration at play. Freeman says, quote, "I care about him a lot. I love him. I know who he is, and I respect him very much. Just as if you had a pastor who looked after your soul, you would love and care for him as well because of the spiritual nature of the relationship. But you're not going to worship him. You're not going to pray to him. You're not going to throw yourself at his feet like what's being said. That's ridiculous. Based on my own observations, LLDM members certainly love their apostle, miss him, and pray for his release. But in the end, they are carried forward by love for God, their church, and the brethren within it, made all the more poignant at this particular Holy Supper in Dallas because it coincided with Valentine's Day. However, it appears that the 14th of February was ultimately chosen for another reason. It is the birthday of the church's first apostle, Aaron. God damn, dude. Let's start with this paragraph. Let's go back. So let's go back to the start of this paragraph. He says, the apostle is very much in control. Okay, I get that. At the same time, he wants to push back on some of the characterizations he wants to push back on characterizations from people who are a little bit biased, such as Fortuny and the Nutinis, because the event in Dallas was successful, and it was without the presence of the apostle. And so here, if people don't know LLDM and they're interested in how churches handle themselves and how other institutions and organizations handle themselves when pandemic shutdowns were happening, I guess this is kind of interesting, where the church is always having the Santa Cena in a certain way, but there's been adaptations in the past, and here they are, and here he's talking about how there's adaptations again, and they're successful, and then also it's also like, no, they're kind of not successful. Here what I'm trying to say is that, like, it's kind of funny that he thinks he's pushing back when it's not really a lot of pushing back. That's what I'm trying to say. The apostle will remain in prison for years to come. That much is true. Perhaps he will continue to make himself available. He just is, and if any, he just is. I don't really see the need of the perhaps, because he just has since then, right? And this person just doesn't. He should just write that it has. And he's talking about this theological observation that has been missed by other observers, by other researchers, where he's talking about how, yeah, the apostle is the present day messenger through whom members ultimately connect with God. That's true, though. That's what they talk about all day long in the church. The fact that members pray silently or express themselves in verbal ways, or that look up to the sky, or that they speak in tongues, doesn't necessarily, it does mean that they're communicating directly through God, but this guy has to acknowledge way more that the immovable object, the immovable fact and factor here is that the apostle, that whoever the person is the funnel the funnel through which, this is how LLDM understands it, the funnel through which they and all of humanity, all earthlings, get to connect through to God, to Jesus, and the heavens, right? It is only through this one living person. Now, mind you, as I've said in other previous videos before, it is very amusing that in the original Church of Christ, thousands of years ago, there was 12 apostles, and the church, the members around, the people listening and all, and vibing with it way back then, they there was only so many people, and there was 12 apostles way back then. But then when it comes to LLDM in the past century, they're only having one apostle at a time, and they all come out of the same lineage apparently, right? So um so again, this guy's gonna finesse the language here to talk about how yeah, members ultimately connect directly with God. That's what they say. But again, like the members themselves, the psalms, the sermons, etc., will tell you ad nauseum and correct you ad nauseum that they cannot do any of these things or be anything. They're dirt, etc., without the presence of the apostle and his prayer and his consideration of them when he's talking to and communicating with God, right? Like, yeah, okay, they pray to God directly and whatnot, but can God talk directly back to the members? That's not what happens. That's not what happens. That's not what they think. What they think is that God talks to Samuel first, the apostle first, and then the apostle disseminates that message later. In LLDM, you cannot be the kind of person who is given some sort of revelation, and then the next day you go up in church and give the sermon, right? That is not what happens in LLDM. Those sorts of revelations and visions and all that other bullshit goes directly to Nathan, to the apostle in turn. So here he's sort of acknowledging that yeah, there's this funnel, between that there's this yeah, I'm sorry, that Nathan is the funnel between all of humanity and the rest of the heavens and God and whatnot. But then he's gonna try to like fold it here and have Jack Freeman's words in his ear here to help counter the rhetoric. The rhetoric isn't really being countered here. I mean, there's no silence here. You guys are talking, you guys are talking, you guys are quoting, etc. But this isn't a good counter because you guys haven't even explained the event actually. And then look, like I mean, Freeman's gonna say, I care about him, I love him a lot. Okay, well, like, has everybody else met him as much as Freeman has met him? I mean, I don't think so. But then, like, of course, like, Freeman knows that the apostle is not like any other fucking pastor. What word does he use? Yeah, let's he says just as if you had a pastor. No, this is not the average person. This is not the average sort of pastor or religious leader of a certain congregation. This guy is in a league of its own. And that's all that LLDM is. Constantly badgering on about how they are in a league of their own. And then, Westbrook comes in and tries to like launder that into like academic studies. This is trash. This is not doing what they think it is doing. And so then he moves on and he says, based on my own observations, LLDM members certainly love their apostle, miss him, and pray for his release. But in the end, they are carried forward by a love for God, etc., etc. I mean, that's to your eyes. You're an outsider. You don't speak Spanish. You went to an event in the United States when adaptations are happening. You just got involved in LLDM studies right after the apostle got arrested, months after. And then like you don't know anything. I don't know who you think you are, but go back to where you crawled out from, right? And then again, it is so troublesome that earlier in the before I forget, earlier in the paragraph, he talks about how members speak directly to God, and I'm sorry, members speak directly to God, and that and then Freeman is going to say, yeah, we look at him, but he should just say that God is on the other side of it when they look at Nathan, that they cannot look at God in any other direction. They cannot see him from any other angle other than looking at him through the lens of Nathan, right? He has not made that clear here. And Nate Freeman's not going to make that clear here, but what Freeman is going to say is that, like, look, just like that, just like any other pastor you have, you're not going to, did he say, you're not going to pray for him? You're not going to pray to him. You're not going to worship him. You're not going to throw yourself at his feet, like what's being said. That's what's happening, though. That's on video. That's on photographs. That's what happens. That's what's in the hymns. That's what's in the sermons. That's what the sermons, a measure of a good sermon is if this shit starts happening, right? That's not ridiculous. That's what you guys do. I mean, like Nason's logo is on the wall. Nason's logo is on the bench. Nason's logo is on the Bible, on the hymn books, on the car decals of people. People have hashtag inocente, hashtag honorable on their cars, and then maybe don't have a LLDM sticker on their cars, or maybe they have both. You know, people have. It practically looks like they worship this man. I mean, it doesn't go any other way. And excuse me, but Westbrook is going to come along and not understand that there's groups of inconditionals, that there's groups of people that there are families who have been in the group for generations. And excuse me, but younger people get groomed into what? Not worshiping him? Okay, maybe. But they end up getting groomed into being in private quarters with Nason, with Samuel, at this private house, at this other private house, maybe at the ranch, maybe on a trip to Europe, to Russia, etc. Like, you know, that happens. And you know, of course, they're not going to talk about this, obviously, but they're so deceptive in that they know this shit, and they know that there are not strawmen out there to deal with. That there are so much stronger things to deal with, and they're just gonna set that aside and play the game on easy mode here, right? So I mean, Westbrook is gonna say they certainly love members certainly love him, et cetera, and it's just who cares? That I mean, you're not doing what you think you're doing here, right? And then he's gonna say, yeah, they all love him, etc. By the way, this is all the more poignant because this particular Holy Supper in Dallas coincided with Valentine's Day. No, it coincides with Samuel's birthday. When Samuel was around, he was having, maybe he had Santa Cenas on his birthday. I'm not too sure. The 14th of February is 6 months earlier than the 14th of August. So if you're going to have another ceremony within a year, it could be like directly, 6 months, right? And so, when Samuel gets out of the picture and he dies, the very first Santa Cenas that Nathan holds are on the 14th of February. Before that, the 14th of February is Samuel's birthday, and the Santa Cenas would be held on the 14th of August, which was Aaron's birthday. But look, he's gonna first talk about how it's Valentine's Day, and so it's like that's like a romantic day. It's kind of sus. It's kind of sus that this guy's gonna talk about members showing up to their church meetings, but then they also have that it's Valentine's Day in the back of their mind, and so therefore they come not just with a sense of love for other people, but a furthered, increased sense of love for the apostle because it's Valentine's Day and not just a religious event. And again, it's the religious event. It's not Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day isn't celebrated in the church. If anything, Valentine's Day means that it's time to fundraise for the church. It's time to send all the members out into the street and extract their free labor, extract their time, and get them to go out there as for church fundraisers to sell roses and teddy bears and all this other crap, right? But look, like Westbrook ends this paragraph in like the stupidest way. However, it appears that 14th of February was ultimately chosen for another reason. It is the birthday of the church's first apostle, Aaron. No, you fucking idiot. Go back to where you crawled from, dude. It's Samuel's birthday. Earlier, you said that the 14th of August was Aaron's birthday. I'm not. Yeah, earlier, just a couple pages earlier. The ceremony usually takes place on the 14th of August, the birthday of the first apostle Aaron. Yeah, when Aaron was around, he would hold the Holy Supper on his birthday. He started that, right? There were no events back then on the 14th of February, as far as I know, right? Even before Samuel was around, right? Aaron was holding the Santa Cenas on his birthday, 14th of August. Page 118. And then you go down to where you were at on page 122, And here you say the 14th of February was ultimately chosen for another reason. It is the birthday of the church's first apostle, Aaron. Did no one read this? Like I right now have written a chapter for an edited collection precisely like this, basically. And I I had this is extracted from my dissertation. It is the last chapter of it. It was 17,000 words. I have gone back and forth with my editors for like a year at this point, for sure a year, back and forth several times, I'll tell you. And there's been so much proofreading, so helpful. And did no one catch this? Did Westbrook not catch this at any point? Did Big Bahia not catch this at any point? Did Freeman not catch this at any point? Did the editors Graham-Hyde and then Thomas, I think was the other person, did they not catch this at any point? I mean, this directly contradicts what you just said earlier. And I mean, leave aside the grammatical mistakes, which we'll get into more later. I'm so baffled that things like this can go through so many hands and has been worked on for so long. He's been working on this stuff since like 2020, and then he was citing things as late as maybe April 2024. I forget, or 2023. He's writing as late as 23 or 24, and there's just still things blatantly wrong here, right? Okay, let's continue. I'll continue reading the next paragraph. Jason H. Dormady, in his book Primitive Revolution, Restorationist Religion and the Idea of the Mexican Revolution, 1940 to 1968, analyzed the evolving theology and practice of the Holy Supper since it was first introduced by the Church's first apostle, Aaron, in 1931. Dormady makes the case that the ceremony began as a way to appeal to Mexicans with backgrounds in both Catholicism and Protestantism, specifically Pentecostalism. Quote, for those disgruntled with Catholicism but still attracted to ritual and hierarchy, it sated those predilections with ceremonies of a Holy Supper, baptism, childhood blessing, and celebrations of miraculous moments in the church. However, for those attracted by the anti-clericalism of Protestantism or moved by the emotional spiritualism and expression of spiritual gifts found in Pentecostalism specifically, LLDM covered those bases as well. So here he's quoting Dormady, and again, these apostrophes are going to confuse me a little bit. 90 years later, what Dormady describes as, quote, new forms of what for them were truly revolutionary spiritual innovations, end quote, have morphed yet again, with the third apostle approving and orchestrating from behind the scenes. He's behind bars. He's behind bars, not behind the scenes. Observers will have to wait and see if more changes are in order for LLDM holidays and celebrations, especially as members become even more accustomed to their apostles' leadership on a remote basis. They're going to get really used to it, right? And again, this guy should, this is the end of the paragraph. Again, this guy should mention here that they got to stay used to it because there's federal charges hanging over him. And this guy's not going to mention that, I believe. So it is also possible that the change in tumult caused by the COVID-19 pandemic have helped normalize an environment in which new or altered experiences are more tolerable, whether that be at the absence of the apostle holding the Holy Supper in a place other than Guadalajara, or other considerations such as the manner in which the bread and the wine juice were prepared. For example, I was impressed by the tremendous amount of care taken and designated by male church members, masked, gloved, and wearing hairnets, who prepared the bread and wine juice. Why does he repeat wine juice twice? It doesn't matter. While they prepared the wine juice cups so that everyone is in attendance would have their own. I should also add that as the pandemic proceeded, the LLDM church became even more stringent in terms of its health procedures, transitioned to remote services, and promoted mask wearing. The church has been outspoken in its support of COVID-19 protocols and especially the need for vaccinations, even setting up vaccination clinics at temples for members and the general public in the United States. These sorts of partnerships with public health initiatives also arguably serve a public relations end to help normalize LLDM as a mainstream, i.e. non-cultic, religious group that follows rather than protests federal and state public health guidelines. So I'm going to go back to the previous paragraph and say that I have Dormady's book downloaded too. I've basically skimmed through it. And this book is just going to be, like Nutini's book. And it's just going to be better than how Westbrook writes about these things. Because if anything, I'm glad Westbrook is citing them because they are the better, I think, resources on this topic than Westbrook is. These people don't seem to be, according to these descriptions. And then, of course, I actually know that, Dormady, René de la Torre, Nutini, etc. Those people didn't come under the wing of the church and become invited in the way that Westbrook is, clearly saying that he has been. And so it's just kind of baffling that this guy's gonna start talking about Dormady and these other people, and it just makes it sound like, yeah, I would rather read them, and I'm going to, read them in full. I'd rather read them than to continue reading this, because this doesn't bring a lot of changes, right? This doesn't amplify the conversation in the way those books have already written a decade ago. Like that, these Dormady's book is from, like, I don't know when this is from. At some point in the 2000s. We'll see it later, but it's much old. It's a little older, and they're just the better authorities. Westbrook's not writing anything new or better here, right? And look, in this last paragraph that I just read of this section, before we move on to the next section, it's just completely baffling. I don't get why. I get that the COVID-19 pandemic is gonna make things change over time. Obviously, it changed things for a time. It has changed back. I mean, it's basically just not. I don't want to say non-existent anymore, but it's still going around, obviously. But here in this paragraph, it's 2024, and there's this whole paragraph on how this guy is impressed that people are wearing their masks, their gloves when preparing food to be distributed to people. Everyone has their own little cup. He was impressed by the stringent by the way people attended to health procedures, etc. And like, again, like Westbrook, like who gives a rat's ass about this? No one cares. Like let me tell you that no one cares about the fact that the church was nice and clean and hygienic. I get it. I feel like any other church or service that you have been to, which you say you have, they would have done this too. I really don't understand how this is so captivating, right? Because look, if you're going to be captivating and like and actually provide something of substance here, that comes at the end, where you say that, like, actually this church helps run vaccine clinics for people in the neighborhood and church members, but they collaborate with federal and state public health guidelines. Okay, I kind of get that, but then also you can actually interrogate that a little bit more. Are there parts where they don't collaborate with federal and state public health guidelines? Tell us a little bit about church. Maybe another aspect of like, why is it that this can become a sentence, and what is underlying that? For example, maybe discuss how do Jehovah's Witnesses have certain, or Mormons have certain attitudes about these sorts of things. You should mention that here a little bit more, because otherwise you're just talking about how impressed you are with how they clean and shit. And then, of course, these sorts of vaccine clinics are arguably serve a public relations end. They do, just like you do. Just like you do at the point in which you came into this field of LLDM studies as an outsider, right? You just came into this, and it's like, yeah, you're part of this too. And it doesn't seem like, if you had gotten to this point, you should have rewinded and reassessed everything you had written up until this point, right? Because, like, you're showing up to these events in Dallas and you're impressed by people using Germ-X, and it's like, I no one really cares. Were you impressed also by the fact that the bathrooms were clean and stocked with toilet paper? Were you impressed by the tamales that the hermana served outside? Were you impressed by, any other number of given things that again would not matter? So, I don't necessarily understand why this matters. This whole paragraph could have been so much better, and it's probably one of the few places where this guy could have had something of substance, and it's not happening here. And it's funny because, like, I don't know. I don't know what we even expect, because before we move on, I want to end that here. He's saying, okay, the church is trying to help normalize itself. It wants to not protest federal and state public health guidelines, and it didn't. I'm not aware of that. But also, they also, like, this guy is not going to mention, like, as my note says, okay, the church's leadership still infantilizes the governments of the world, the state governments, the federal governments. They say that the governments are tools of God, that God is pulling the strings ultimately. overall, they think the U.S. government is corrupt, especially at this point where when their guy is arrested, and and he's prolonging his pretrial phase, right? And then there was at one point towards the end of Donald Trump's first term where LLDM members are spreading these rumors of how Donald Trump is going to intervene in NJG's case because he had heard about him, he was impressed by him, he was impressed by the church, he thinks he's being handled unfairly. And like, here Westbrook could have talked a lot about how Javier Becerra, who is still Attorney General at this time in like 2020, in California. And then later when Biden comes into office, a couple months into that, Javier Becerra becomes he comprises part of Biden's cabinet, right? He's not going to talk about how back then when Javier Becerra is the Attorney General, the LLDM people are just grilling him, saying that he's Catholic, he's corrupt. Here's a picture with him with this person. Here's a picture of him at this other Catholic event. This person is corrupt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess it's one thing for them to look after for their health and their community's health. I get that, and that's great. But then it's another thing that Westbrook does not mention here, where the church is completely like looking down upon the government and basically shooing them. I guess they adhere to the public health guidelines, but they kind of don't want to adhere to anything else, such as, for example, the criminal case brought against Nason, because the party line that the church is putting out is that one, there's an embargo on information. Members cannot read Univision. Members cannot read the Attorney General's report. Members cannot read court proceedings, etc. So, Westbrook's not even going to mention that here, right? And then Westbrook is also not going to mention how probably at this Santa Cena that the church probably had a special prayer where they tell God to please handle and take care of the authorities. They are ultimately puppets and clay in God's hands, and God can do whatever He wants with them, and that world events and whatnot are not the business of members, because their business is to evangelize and spread the message as much as they can, and continually renew their relationship to God and Jesus and whatnot on an annual basis, like what this article is about. And so, I mean, this guy should have, again, I'm sorry for saying this, but this guy should have mentioned that while the church is adhering to public health guidelines at different levels here, at the end of the day, they don't really adhere to the federal and state public health. They don't really adhere to the state criminal case against Nason and the federal case against Nason. So let's move on to the next segment. Persecution, violence, and the realities of liminality in the wake of the apostles' arrest, imprisonment. Persecution, violence, and the realities of liminality. Here's the sentence. In the wake of the apostles' arrest, imprisonment, trial, and reconviction, it appears that every day LLDM members remain committed followers and continue to express their faith even at a moment in their church's history where it is increasingly subject to persecution, discrimination, and even violence. Steady or increased religious commitment in the face of adversity is not altogether surprising, especially for new religious movements researchers familiar with the resilient ways in which religious organizations and members cope with and rationalize events that conflict with expected outcomes and contribute to cognitive dissonance. Whether or not LLDM continues to retain membership in the coming years remains to be seen, but it is clear that those who choose to stay or join have faced an increase in anti-LLDM sentiment. Francisco Tenorio, in a 2020 article, actually, before we get into this, I'm gonna stop in the middle of this paragraph. Another thing I want to say is that not only are people adhering to the federal and state public health guidelines, but like it's also the case that I don't understand why this guy is going to say that there's no there's points for cognitive dissonance, but then he's also just going to just undermine them. Persecution, violence, and the realities of liminality. In the wake of the apostles' arrest, imprisonment, trial, and conviction, it appears that everyday members remain committed followers and continue to express their faith even at a moment in the church's history where it is increasingly subject to persecution, discrimination, and even violence. Steady or increased religious commitment in the face of adversity is not altogether surprising, especially for new religious movement researchers familiar with the resilient ways in which religious organizations and members cope with and rationalize events that conflict with expected outcomes and contribute to cognitive dissonance. Whether or not LLDM continues to retain membership in the coming years remains to be seen, but it is clear that those who choose to stay or join have faced an increase in anti-LLDM sentiment. Before moving on, I want to say that before we move on from the federal and state public health guidelines, there was this mantra coming from members when the shutdowns were happening in March of 2020, weeks after the Santa Cena, that when the shutdowns were happening, there was this mantra coming from members that I remember I read and I just could not let go of, where members were saying essentially, just as humanity has decided to arrest the apostle, so has God decided to arrest humanity, meaning quarantine. And so what they mean is that, some months after the arrest of Nason, there's this pandemic going on and these shutdowns going on, and people are going to be isolated and social distance and having to work remotely, etc. And so, there was this mantra back then of how LLDM members were, number one, rationalizing the arrest of their apostle, but then also rationalizing that in the grand world global event of the COVID-19 pandemic, where again, they were saying that this pandemic is something unleashed by God because he's mad that his apostle is still arrested, right? And so again, what does that tell you about how dismissive LLDM members are of the governments that they're supposedly, adhering to some extent, right? I don't really understand why this guy is not going to talk about that when, and actually I understand it. You're Westbrook, like you're not going to do what you should be doing in this, right? And so here he talks about how, again, it appears that members remain committed, that they're not, dude. And, is there an increase? Is there an increase in persecution? I don't doubt it. It's happened. I'm very sure. I don't doubt that. But he also sort of acknowledges about how these sorts of things can lead to cognitive dissonance. And this is like the only place where he allows any sort of space for there to be a shred of doubt in any of the minds of the people he's in any given room, right? Because he's not really going to mention that. And when he's in the room and he's talking about how people falling over and everything like that, apparently no one has doubts. But when it comes to this grander thing of like facing persecution, having to go through the pandemic, having to go through these other hardships, I get that. And that definitely contributes to some sort of cognitive dissonance, and as it should, right? But again, as should people be subject to persecutions and whatnot? I absolutely don't think so, but we'll move on. Francisco Tenorio, in a 2020 article, outlined numerous examples of discrimination against LLDM members around the world following the apostles' arrest, custody disputes, loss of employment, and bullying and physical violence at schools. A more recent example occurred in Houston on 10 July 2021, when a gunman approached the main LLDM temple around midday with members and children eating lunch on the front lawn and fired at least 12 bullets at the building before fleeing in his vehicle. LLDM members apprehended the suspect, and he was arrested by local police. Fortunately, no one was physically injured or killed, though some of the shots entered through administrative offices as well as into the pastor's office and lobby. The gunman, Josue David Cordova, was not a member of the church, but according to court data as reported in the Houston Chronicle, he took aim at the church for believing that the church was responsible for brainwashing his family, lending support to the idea that he was indeed motivated by anti-cultic rhetoric and presuppositions about the influence of mind control. Biva Estrada, who was still pastor of the Houston LLDM temple at the time, toured me around the LLDM complex about 2 weeks after the incident. This was the third shooting at the Houston area LLDM site within a year, and it coincided with the rise in other incidents directly against LLDM temples and members. And another example from Houston, in 2nd of July 2020, a temple was vandalized in what was later determined to be a hate crime, with words such as abusive
mistreatment, pedophilia, and bastards, spray painted prominently on the exterior of the building. Now look, if you don't know, Francisco Tenorio is some sort of Christian minister or some sort of Christian person from Brazil who was approached by LLDM and Massimo Introviglia and company, and he contributed to that Sesnud journal back in 2020, where I think he's the last chapter, where he writes about persecution that members were facing after the arrest of their apostle. And, again, I don't deny that any of that stuff happened. I don't exactly remember my gripes with that article. You can go back to my video on that. There's a very long video where I, read that thing in full and discuss it as it happens. But again, I will always make it clear that I do not doubt that persecution has happened, continued to happen after 2020, after 2019, and will continue to happen into the future. And I disavow all that stuff because I view my gripes way more, to be with the leadership of the church rather than the average everyday member. I really don't know any ex-member who was excited that such a shooting incident such as this happened. But again, before moving on to that shooting incident, before moving on to 2021, let's stay in 2020. The Nodio, has that article with Sesnud, and I think by 2021 or maybe late 2020, at some point there, for sure before the conviction of Nason in the summer of 2022, Tenorio backtracked on his collaborations with the church. He felt like the church was lying to him and providing to him a false narrative of the course of events in the courtrooms. And so he actually backtracked. And by that, he went on a number of like YouTube channels with a number of discussions with people, discussing how he, is not in line with the way that the church wants to present itself to the public, right? And so, Westbrook, he was writing as late as 2023, let's say, and this guy is not going to mention that the Nodio has backtracked with his support here, right? He's just going to cite him a little bit here quickly and move on, because he's going to move on to something that did happen in July 2021. I remember when this happened. And as we just read, I will say that, Josue, Cordova, I've never met the guy. He was apparently never a member, so I wouldn't have known him. I don't even know his family members exactly. I've never actually cared to know who his family members were in the church. But look, he did this, and no one supported this. No one actually supported this. And if anything, I think it should lead Westbrook to question the fact that there is this person who's not a member that apparently took these stupid claims, that apparently took this stupid action. Because again, I agree with Cordova. There has been some sort of brainwashing of his family. He's right there. And I think Westbrook should be saying that. I think Westbrook should be validating this a tiny bit more than he is. But then, of course, completely disavowing that this guy took this stupid, reckless act and then got caught like a fucking idiot, right? This guy was just crashing out, apparently. And just had no, just apparently just did not have anything outside of a jail cell to care for, right? He just apparently just really wanted to end up in a jail cell, is how I view this guy. And so now you have Westbrook, touring around with Estrada, showing him these, what happened. And, according to Virginia Beckett, who put this chapter on my radar, she says that this Houston Chronicle article, which I've read, I didn't reread it for this, but doesn't even mention that there's been other incidents of discrimination and vandalism prior to this shooting, right? And so I get why he's mentioning it here, but he has to hedge this a lot more than he should, than Westbrook, is writing here. And again, I want to say that additionally, long before Nason came into power, long before Nason was arrested, the Houston church was built in 2000, was completed in 2005. And it is off the side of a major highway with like 5-6 lanes on both sides. It's like 12-10 lanes. It's so much traffic. It is directly between the major Houston airport in the north and the downtown area. And then, of course, it connects and like into the weavings of the rest of the highway system in Houston. A lot of people drive past this church. This church has had rocks thrown at it, bullets shot at it, etc., for ages. I really want to know each and every single incident of damage and shit done like that. But like it should be mentioned that has happened before, right? Because again, not all of these incidents are very targeted. Sometimes people just drive past it and want to shoot it. I'm pretty sure that has happened at least one time, and these people probably had no shred of an idea. I'm pretty sure that has happened one time. But look, when it happens with someone like Cordova, um, this is apparently like the only kind of non-member that Westbrook has in the article, and this is just a guy who's just a gun-toting, gun-slinging, uh, duns, just shooting shit everywhere. Who apparently reads a lot of anti-cultic rhetoric, and then decides to take these stupid actions. Cordova is serving a certain purpose here, and it's just not like right. It's just not right in the way that it is not right in the way that it should be. And again, if Estrada is in your ear in Dallas and Houston, and if he's in your ear in California and elsewhere, then like he may as well have written this article. Like if you're just going to be writing about people who are not part of the church in these ways, or academics who are not part of the church who have written in these other ways, then like you may as well have had Estrada like write this whole thing, right? Nason Joaquin Garcia pled guilty to sex crimes in the 3rd of June of 2022, after close to 3 years of sitting in jail ahead of a trial, and was sentenced to nearly 17 years in prison. Also, I'm sorry, before I move on, Cordova got in trouble, and here the church is like so happy that the criminal justice system is in place to help them. I'm glad it is here too, right? Cordova's stupid. I don't know who this person is. This person is very stupid, right? But then like again, when you rewind back to Nason and what he was up to, oh well, there the criminal justice system is trash and they're corrupt from top to bottom, and we're going to comply with the health guidelines over here. But actually, in all actuality, when people come knocking on our doors, when people go searching through the home of the apostle in Los Angeles, well, there the people are corrupt and not worth our time and whatnot. So again, as I have a video on this already, titled something like what does LLDM mean when the system is corrupt? Because they are very much a part of the system, and they view the system as very corrupt in certain ways and have been for a long time. But then they are also, they themselves, at the root, at the center of corruption and of the system, the political economic system in Mexico. And then when it comes to the United States, over here you're sloshing around millions of dollars to defend your guy against the state on charges that he ultimately ended up pleading guilty to. So I'm sorry, let's finish the next paragraph that we had just read. Garcia pled guilty to sex crimes on the 3rd of June 2022 after close to 3 years of sitting in jail ahead of a trial, and was sentenced to nearly 17 years in prison. However, his legal difficulties are not yet over, and as of September 2022, he faces a sexual abuse lawsuit in California. From whom? Talk about who? Say who it is. Say who it is. Can you even mention? Has he even mentioned that there's multiple victims that came forward that were minors? Right? Earlier here he's not going to mention. He pled guilty to sex crimes, and he's never going to say a lick of a word that is minors again, right? But he pled guilty to them, right? And then here he's going to mention that there's other people that bringing legal suits, and he's not going to mention that they're now adults, but they were minors at the time, and this is connected to the previous state charges. And and if he's writing in 2023, he doesn't know about the federal charges, but he should have known that they would have been coming, right? And so this guy should be writing about that. He's not mentioning that. He's not going to do that. He's just going to sound like the people he's going to write about next, right? So let me finish this paragraph, actually. LLDM spokespersons B.Y. Estrada and Jack Freeman attended CESNUR's annual meeting, held that year at Laval University in Quebec City in 2022. LLDM was the subject of the panel, where I was one of the academic speakers, and naturally, the apostles' legal trouble and guilty plea were discussed in the session. After a series of presentations, Estrada and Freeman read from a prepared statement, first in Spanish and then in English, that provided the church's rationale for why he pled guilty, rather than continue the trial. Here's a statement, quote, "The most common question we have been asked, why did the apostle plead guilty? If you recall, for the last 3 years, the apostle Nason Joaquin Garcia always pled not guilty. However, the decisions taken by the court during the last 3 years have categorically weakened his possibility of presenting a proper defense that would prove his innocence. Trying his case before a jury under those conditions and not being able to use the exculpatory evidence practically left him defenseless, risking a probable prolonged imprisonment. For those reasons, with much pain, the apostle of Jesus Christ had to accept the agreement presented to him by the California prosecutor's office that would allow him a reduced sentence and avoid being subjected to a trial in which he would not have the possibility of using the available evidence for his defense that would prove his innocence. I mean, why are you quoting this here if you're just going to not say other things in other parts where you're not quoting? Because these people can read the statement at this Cessnood conference, and I mean, I was not there, and I'm very curious as to what was thought, because like the dude pled guilty, and in that statement, this quote at least, there's no mention of minors being involved, and no just this sort of rationale given to outsiders for this. And it's a stupid statement in that Estrada and Freeman know, but are gonna write like this intentionally. They know that the purpose of the trial was not to prove that someone is innocent. The purpose of the trial is for the state to prove that the guy is guilty. The purpose of the defense is to say no, and here's some reasonable doubt for that. They are not there to plead innocence. They're there to plead not guilty. And so that's what Nason was doing for 3 years, prolonging and prolonging and prolonging the process up until the very last second where a trial had to happen. This dude decided to plead guilty to, yeah, of course, not risk a probable prolonged sentence, but he still got 17 years slapped onto him, right? He still got 17 years slapped onto him and ended up proving nothing in the process. Because again, if these guys truly would communicate what they are making members and encouraging members to believe, that Nason has magic powers, that he is omnipotent, that he can read your mind, that this, that, and the third, right? Why is it not that they're going to mention here that obviously they're not going to do this, but for other learned people about this, that know about this group, they could, it could have been a possibility in the minds of members that Nason shows up to his trial and he does Jedi mind tricks on everybody to get himself off scot-free, to okay, prove his innocence, as he says, but really to prove that that there is reasonable doubt that he is guilty, right? That's the purpose of this, right? And so like, they're not gonna say that, but they're gonna hedge and finesse the words in certain ways to communicate it like this to outsiders. This is just not good. This is just trash, right? You just sound like a stenographer for the church. Again, just have Estrada or Freeman write this. Despite this legal outcome, the LLDM statement given at Cessnood also confirmed that the apostle will continue to lead the church from behind bars. Quote, the apostle of Jesus Christ, Nason Joaquin Garcia, is and will continue to be the spiritual guide of the light of the world. Freeman read to the audience in the English translation. We publicly express our full and complete support and trust, and our trust in him remains intact with full knowledge of his integrity, his conduct, and his work. Okay, I mean, that's just what Westbrook sounds like. I don't know why you need to quote Freeman. I mean, that's just what Westbrook sounds like, right? And then why quote Freeman if Westbrook is just gonna put his head on a swivel at the Santa Cena and say like, yeah, that's what everyone thinks. So I don't know why this is here. In September 2022, the apostle spoke to followers in Mexico via phone and reiterated much the same message. Quote, I do not see the bars that separate me from you, Garcia said to his faithful. I see your beautiful faces because you are the children of God. On the subject of discrimination and persecution, the statement included the following details. Quote, I can report to you that since the arrest of the apostle 3 years ago, members of our community around the world have suffered acts of religious discrimination in various forms, including vandalism, hate speech, discrimination in school and at work, threats, bullying at school, insults on social networks, and even physical aggressions. Some of our temples have even been vandalized, windows broken, people have been called to threaten to burn down or shoot at our temples, and our religious services have been disrupted by people who have come into our temples to offend church members. We have reported these incidents to the appropriate authorities, and we keep record of these acts of religious discrimination and intolerance, end quote. So, I mean, here he's just going to say that Nason called at one point to say, I do not, to just give like a cute little quote from Nason. I mean, that's fine, I guess. But then he's going to go back to this point about how from the statement about how there's been discrimination against members. And you know what? I don't doubt it. It's happened. That act from Cordova is an act of discrimination, completely misdirected, completely stupid. But that is an act of discrimination. I've seen churches get vandalized. I've seen graffiti and whatnot. I don't doubt that that has happened. I don't doubt that someone at a workplace or maybe at a school has been questioned uh, in a mean manner or worse, or maybe has been bullied, etc. I absolutely buy that. I think that is true. I just again, Westbrook should be identifying the fact that there is a massive gulf between the apostle under this umbrella of La Luz del Mundo. There's a massive gulf between the apostle, people in the higher echelons of the organization, and then the average everyday member. Because when the guy gets arrested for sexual abuse charges, it's not that everybody gets in trouble for that. That's not, that's not what happened. Not everybody got in trouble for that. It's just that one guy. He just happens to be the leader of this cultic group, right? But then like if the charges were something else, then one could construe that the state of California was going not just after the leader, but then also other members. But here, but actually in the case in California, the state of California is going after the leader of the church in defense of people who used to be part of that church, right? People who were, let's say brainwashed, let's say groomed, let's say unduly influenced to go into close contacts with the apostle and end up having crimes and horrific things being done to them by that guy that they have revered and been taught to revere for so long from afar on TV screens with the pyrotechnics of presentations, with sermons here left and right every day, right? People have pictures of the apostle in their house, right? In multiple rooms in their house. Maybe not even just Nathan, but also Samuel too. Like that is the case. And this guy is just not going to grant any sort of discussion of that. And it is just it's completely baffling that this guy is going to write like this and think that he's accomplishing anything. Here, you just sound like a stenographer for the church. It's 2024, it's 2025, and this is the state of like academic, scholarship, supposed academic scholarship on La Luz del Mundo, where you learn nothing, and it's really just sounds like the church wrote it. And this one, I don't know. I'll stop there. I'll continue reading. Most of the LLDM temples I have visited in Southern California and Central Texas are located in urban areas with dense Hispanic populations, which makes sense for a new religion with origins in Mexico and a membership base that speaks Spanish. More research needs to be conducted on the causes, backgrounds, and expressions of those who targeted LLDM as a cult. But it seems to me that much of the hate speech and crimes, at least, are operationalized within a Catholic counter-cult culture. Massimo Introvigne, for example, has written on distinctions between religious counter-cult movements and secular anti-cult movements. And the case of LLDM, and in the case of LLDM, the former seems more prominent and problematic, culturally speaking. He means that religious counter-cult movements seem more prominent and problematic rather than the secular ones. I'm a secular guy, but I'll just say that. It also makes sociological sense that Catholics would be most likely to take issue with LLDM, especially given its large share of the religious market in Mexico. Also, LLDM's restorationist claims bring it into conflict with the notion of apostolic succession in the Catholic Church that traces back from the present-day Pope in his capacity as the Bishop of Rome to the biblical Peter, thousands of years. Meanwhile, LLDM's restorationist ideology conflicts with that of another prominent North American-born religious group, the Mormons, which maintains a strong missionary presence in Mexico and throughout the world. Now look, like Westbrook, like the church is not as large as you think it is. Okay, they take a share of people in Mexico, again, like less than 1%, but they take a share. But then also, like if you're going to be talking about other North American born religious groups, it's not just that the Mormons were born in 1830s upstate New York, right? It's that happened. They end up spreading across to Utah and whatnot by like the mid 19th century. And then also, like I said earlier, and I don't have these numbers off the top of my head, but I would probably bet money that the Mormons maybe even the Jehovah's Witnesses, but for sure the Mormons have more members in Mexico than LLDM has. And so here he's going to mention, the Mormons in a certain way and say like, oh, you can compare them. Well, like actually compare them, like actually run some numbers. Give me some numbers for the Mormons in Mexico. Because the moment you say that, you're immediately, the moment you would mention that at the end of this paragraph, you would have contradicted the first two sentences of your entire chapter. I hope that makes sense. What all of this means is that LLDM finds itself in liminal spaces on multiple fronts, and alongside other new religious movements that view themselves as carrying forward older traditions. LLDM offers scholars yet another case study of the challenges involved with the classification of cults or new religious movements. In terms of self-identification, LLDM members do not view themselves as part of a new or alternative religion, and indeed quite the opposite. The apostles, from their viewpoint, are continuing a tradition that extends back 2,000 years, one that itself grew out of an even older and Jewish ancestry. Okay, right. I'm sorry, let's finish the paragraph. Being labeled a new religious movement rather than a cult, however, offers the group a level of neutrality or respectability, even possible legitimacy from scholars. In the face of the apostles' imprisonment, and as the group's everyday members remain committed to the cause, freely participate in church life, really? Okay, and support the leaders. Similarly, LLDM does not want to be regarded as merely yet another Pentecostal church, since that simplification fails to account for its restorationist theology and ecclesiology. As the church continues to expand its membership base outside of Mexico and the United States, the process of globalization will surely bring with it new cultural challenges and opportunities as it seeks to be understood on its own terms. These growing pains will likely lead to the need for continued public relations campaigns to address the ongoing perception of the group as a cult, especially since these have had real-world consequences in the form of vandalism and violence against LLDM members and temples. Whether this confluence of anti-cult, counter-cult rhetoric and discrimination waxes or wanes remains to be seen. As LLDM brothers and sisters acclimate to the absence of their apostle, fallout from his conviction, and remaining legal challenges. I will say that he's saying that there's going to be growing pains for the church. There's shrinking pains. Westbrook. You came into this area of LLDM studies, the arena of it in early 2020, apparently. And this is after the arrest of the apostle. And so you're already like 6 months late to the shrinking pains that were going on in the organization. When the organization was badgering on about having 5 million members, and you, a scholar, so with some sort of historical training, I would presume, maybe not as much as me, but you don't even really need any to understand that the church has been just badgering on about how it has 5 million members since the 90s. And it's 2019, and when there's so much attention on it, they're still badgering on about how there's 5 million members. And then by early 2021, the Mexican census, INEGI, INEGI, is saying that there's less than 200,000 people in Mexico that pertain to LLDM. And a quarter of those are children, people under 18. And so it's shrinking pains. It's always been shrinking pains. Massimo Introvigne is in the picture, and you are in the picture precisely because there are shrinking pains. And you're coming in here laundering their reputation, sort of normalizing them, not criticizing me, and putting your thumb down, putting your foot down in the way that you should to get at the truth. Because otherwise you're just obscuring it here, and you are nothing more than a stenographer for the church at this point. And that's kind of wrong to say, because people, I don't imagine LLDM members printing this out and handing it to one another at sermons and at church meetings, right? To make themselves, for the purposes of, this is why you exist. You're here for the purposes of helping the church members feel like they are a part of something larger, and that there are people who are not members, who have not been blessed by God. They look down on you, just like they look down on the governments and whatnot. They look down on you too. You're not here to help give some sort of real assessment of the church. You are just here to launder it. And even then, like, this wouldn't even really stand. This would face some scrutiny in church circles. It's kind of really amusing to understand that people like this exist and can put this kind of work out, put the time into this, and it's actually trash in a lot of directions, right? So again, going back to the beginning of this paragraph, I agree. I guess LLDM is in some sort of liminal space, but that liminal space is actually way more, because way more having to do with the fact that not just that there's this confluence of labels trying to being applied to them, and none, and some are sticking and some are not. It is that they are in a liminal space because they are experiencing shrinking pains, because the guy got arrested, and then there's this wave of scrutiny, and so much of it not good, so some of it so much, so well, and we need more of it, right? We don't need you though. Like, you're coming in here to talk all these things, and I've learned nothing on the other side of this article, right? Because look, like, if anyone's going to learn anything, you can just learn that, like, oh, there's these labels, LLDM doesn't agree with these labels for these reasons, and then it's just kind of that, and you don't even deliver that point fully, right? Like, you should be delivering that point way more fully. I'm an ex-member, and I can do that for you if you had reached out to me and actually wanted to learn a thing or two, right? But look, just like this guy is not gonna, there's no place that he could cite me, but he probably could have known about me and probably could have reached out to me for some help, right? Or for like a better picture of the church. And that didn't happen. But set me aside. If this guy was studying the church from 2020 to like 2023, then why are there no citations of Isaias Alvarado anywhere here? This guy is citing Alejandra Molina for news updates, or maybe Layla Miller from the LA Times. And so, his news citations are not that well, because the people he should be citing is Isaias Alvarado, like up and down. And set that guy aside. There's actually other sorts of scrutiny that you could have applied to this church that you were not entertaining at all, because you would just enter a given room and Estrada and Freeman would just whisper in your ear that everyone's on board, and you just kind of believe that. So like, you're here to teach some people certain things, but even they aren't really learning a lot. And I would hope, intensely hope, that the true person that has some sort of blank mind, that was not a member, that was not an ex-member, that has never heard of the church, that is just maybe way more vanilla, than that, but not too vanilla. But think of some sort of vanilla ass person that would come to this. I would hope that person, or at least I would know that there are pathways for that person to read through this and then kind of still cock their heads at it and be a little confused by what you're trying to do here, right? Because again, why are you citing Introvigne when you should be citing Estrada or Samuel or Nason themselves, who they've gone ad nauseum about this? So there are points like that where other people could have seen the cracks in this. There's a lot of cracks, there's major cracks, but then even the kind of person who would even the kind of person who would be way too far to see the bigger cracks, they would still see something from afar. The church is globalizing, it's spreading. I don't contend that, but like, of course, I contend that people freely participate in these things, that everyone just supports the leader. That's not true. Again, here you should put its followers seem committed enough. I mean, that was a better way of wording it, like you worded it earlier. Here, you're not going to put the word seem. You're just going to say they remain committed enough. You remain stupid and useless. Okay, LLDM wants to be understood in its own terms. Okay, I get that. That's fine. But well, that's not that's barely the substance of this article, I would say. We've come to the end. That's all I have to say about this. Before we move on, I do have some more to say. I will say that there's this acknowledgement segment, and I will read it here. I am thankful to Big Valle Estrada, who arranged for a number of scholars, myself included, to visit the February 2020 Holy Supper in Dallas, Texas. The day before the Holy Supper, I participated in an LLDM sponsored academic forum, along with J. Gordon Melton and Holly Folk, where I presented some observations that emerged after visiting temples in Southern California. So, that happened. And then it showed up in the Journal of Sesnud, which is what he says here. He says, Big Valle also kindly provided me the English translation of the statement read by another church spokesperson, Jack Freeman, at the June 2022 Sesnud conference in Quebec City, as part of a panel entitled A Fast-Growing Religious Movement, a Global Charitable Network, and an Apostle in Jail. I presented on this panel, as did Massimo Introvigne, Sara Pozos Bravo, Rosita Sorite, and J. Gordon Milton with Estrada and Freeman responding on behalf of LLDM in Spanish and English, respectively. First of all, mention that Sara Pozoles is a member and one of the most egregious and cockamamie and sycophantic members of the church. This person's just basically directly benefiting from the lies of the church. And then look, like if you're hanging out, you should mention that Sara Pozos is a member and that all these other people are not members. But look, I found it so interesting that this guy mentioned J. Gordon Melton and Holly Folk. J. Gordon Melton shows up in that System Journal, so I'm not surprised about that one. What I'm surprised is about Holly Folk because, again, a month ago or so, I put together that LLDM bibliography. I went through dozens of bibliographies. I was very, very, very thorough, very, very thorough in putting that thing together. At no point did I ever come across this name of this person, Holly Folk. And yet she's involved in studies of LLDM going back to like 2020. And so I want to read something else from her in a bit. But again, it is kind of this acknowledgement just basically says that Estrada wrote it. Like, if anything, I would hope that a learned person would see this and read this and think that like, oh, Estrada just wrote this, because you can't really learn much from this chapter that this guy wrote, right? So look, let's go to the footnotes. I want to say very quickly that here in October 2023. Nelson Joaquin Garcia was indicted in the U.S. on federal child pornography charges. That much is true. And so, when we go to the bibliography here, he has these parts where he's accessing things as late as April 2023. And then I guess he does mention, and he knows about this these new charges in late 2023. And this book comes out in 2024. And yet, did this guy mention this in the body paragraph? He should mention this, right? Because actually, he mentioned the civil cases that Nathan was facing after the state criminal case in 2022. He mentioned that there's civil cases, right? But like, then you should mention this in the body paragraph too. You should have mentioned this in the very last paragraph. You should have mentioned this in the part where you were saying that, like, yeah, LODM is going to have to continue to adapt to the future. They adapted to the arrest of their apostle. They adapted to COVID-19 pandemic. Their apostle was still arrested. And they're going to, continue to adapt like any other. Well, yeah, they're going to really have to continue to adapt if the federal government is going to have, which has a high success rate on these sorts of things, is now pointing the barrel at Nason, right? If now they're holding the gun, and like, yeah, you should have mentioned this in the body. I really don't know why you buried this in the notes. Additionally, here you mentioned Mary Puckett's dissertation from 2017. I spoke to Mary Puckett last summer. I read her entire dissertation. You can find it. It is very interesting as I told her that in the best way possible, it is a sort of time capsule of what LLDM was like when Nathan comes into power from 2015 to 2017, where there is this rejuvenation of the church, where there is this new young leader who is going to send missionaries everywhere, and that is going to start having Santa Cenas on the 14th of February, which was Samuel's birthday, and is going to still continue to have some Santa Cenas on the 14th of February, of August, and the birthday of the apostle, 7th of April or 9th of April, I don't really recall, where that is going to be a much more important holiday going forward, right? That happens. And it's just funny that this guy's going to bury mention of Mary Puckett's dissertation here, and he could have mentioned some other studies, that have since that from around this time, but he doesn't, because he wants to just sort of say that he did his little insightful work here and not bring out the substance of this, because there are parts in Mary Puckett's dissertation, and I told her that her work is interesting. It sucks that it is limited by the fact that the guy that Nixon got arrested 2 years later, but it is still interesting as a time capsule. And additionally, when you read it, she does not come across as the most value neutral person. She certainly writes value neutral, but then there are certain parts of the dissertation where, to me, it became very clear that she wanted more answers from a church member, from a minister, and she was pressing on certain questions, but she would just be met with a wall. And this person doesn't just, Puckett doesn't serve the purpose of being the wall. She writes about how she came across some sort of walls of information like that. But Westbrook, when you're writing here and elsewhere, you're just the wall, you know? Like you're not pressing, you're not pressing at all. And you're just kind of towing the party line. And you're not party to this, you know? You're just some white guy from bumfuck nowhere who writes about Scientology. I highly doubt that your work on Scientology is good. But then look, when you transition, when you sidestep over to here at the invitation of LLDM members who apparently know that you write on Scientology and are now inviting you to come write on them, that should say something, right? Now that you come over to this, you're not even doing your due diligence on the work that is out there, right? Again, those are just the footnotes, just 8 of them in like several many pages. That there could have been more. And here's some references that the guy makes. Actually, he has parenthetical citations, and then he has footnotes. And here's the bibliography that this guy has. Again, I get all this. This is all kind of a little helpful, but again, this is the state of LLDM studies that it looks over, contributes to, wants to help boost and whatnot. And this is what they look like. They look like trash. This didn't do anything other than make Westbrook look bad across a 4 or 5 year time span. He hasn't done any or learned anything. And this just makes LLDM look bad because he's not towing the party line as much as they want to, as much as they would want. And when he is towing it, then he's just towing it and he's not teaching people anything, right? I hope that makes sense. Do you have any thoughts or questions on this? Let me know. That I have here. This is Donald A. Westbrook's website. Teacher, author, researcher. There's 2 pages. He has 2 dumb pictures here. There's a homepage that just does nothing. There's just nothing here. And then there's an about page where you don't learn anything about him. And this is really just a landing page to direct people to go to the Google Scholar page that he has. You can go here. I guess he teaches at San Jose State University to some extent. I should send him an email. And he's written on Scientology, et cetera, et cetera. But like his latest book is Mariachi in the 21st Century. It's in 2024. It's about music. And you know what, dude? You know, that's probably fucking shit too. Like that's probably trash too. I don't know what to tell you because you just stepped into something that you were not built for. And so I just want to show people this, that apparently this guy's written on mariachis since LLDM, when he's not busy with LLDM, right? Here's this person, Holly Folk, who was mentioned in the acknowledgments and earlier in the chapter. Again, I was not aware of this person until she got mentioned here. And in that journal of Cessnood and in the J. Gordon Melton chapter, Holly Folk isn't mentioned there, I'm pretty sure, right? I would have to go back to that to really double check, but if I had seen her name, then I would have seen her name. And this person does not have any publications or anything on La Luz del Mundo other than just showing up to that sort of academic forum that was sponsored by LLDM at the February 2020 Santa Cena in Dallas, right? This person just shows up there to talk a little bit about the church for some reason. But look, Holly Folk has a PhD, is some sort of professor in religious studies at Western Washington University. Okay, right? I mean, and then look, you do this yourself. Go look up Holly Folk and La Luz del Mundo. You won't find any publications on this person, by this person, on this subject. Because instead, what you will just find is just that she got mentioned in this chapter by Westbrook. And then there's this little interview on the Western Washington University website, little interview from January 2020 on religion, on what she studies and whatnot. So I didn't read this whole thing. I only looked for La Luz del Mundo. Here are the parts where she talks about La Luz del Mundo. I'll read it here. Western Today magazine, not a magazine. They ask her, you have put a lot of work into studying La Luz del Mundo, one of the biggest denominations of these new Christianities in Latin America. Tell us about your work with them in Mexico and how they fit into the religious landscape of a country still very much dominated by the Catholic Church. This is what Folk says. I was on research leave this past fall and spent 2 weeks with LLDM at their headquarters in Guadalajara and then in Mexico City. Since 1924, La Luz del Mundo LLDM has been led by a succession of leaders who are recognized as modern apostles, meaning that they are appointed by God to lead the church. In the same way that St. Paul was called in biblical times, their belief that authentic Christianity has been restored, plus their socially conservative lifestyle has led to comparisons sometimes being drawn between LLDM and the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. I see some similarities in their commitment to community development and mutual aid, and I'm even more interested in the cultural substrates that might set these groups apart. Among other things, you guessed it, the Roman Catholic Church is a much stronger foil in Mexico than it is in the United States, though Catholicism is also the largest religion in the US. Internationally, LLDM may have as many as 5 million members, mostly in Latin America. They represent about 1% of the Mexican population and also 1% of Mexican Americans. This makes them large enough to draw the ire of mainstream authorities. In Mexico, LLDM has protested many instances of religious discrimination. There have been accusations of misconduct launched against the past and present leaders of the church. The current apostle is right now being charged in an abuse case in Los Angeles. This is a serious issue. I am not involved in the case, but I am aware that in pretrial negotiations, the defense raised concerns about prosecutorial misconduct. I lived with families from the church while in Mexico. My hosts were amazingly kind, sincere people, and I hope that very much that the court case is resolved soon. Folk, get the fuck out of here. What are you saying at any point and anywhere? You're saying things, and it's here, right? And it's right in front of our face. And I mean, what this person is just gonna say right off the bat is that this is their involvement with La Luz del Mundo, and they only got involved apparently last fall in 2019 after the arrest of the guy. Here, she's not gonna mention that the guy got arrested on accusations of child sexual abuse, right? And she's not gonna mention that Samuel also got in trouble for that too, suspected of that. And she's just going to say that there's just accusations kind of being thrown left and right about people, you know, and not give any, you know, accusations of misconduct, you know, left and right. She's not going to spell out why she's even part of this, you know. She's you know, I'm so sure this person's making some sort of money or some sort of something that benefits her to go and launder the reputation of the church like this and to be wishy-washy with the details. But look, the second sentence, this person says, since 1924, the church started. That's not true. Westbrook says it's 1926. Everybody knows it's 1926. Even then, the actual beginnings of the church are kind of not that firm because so much of what Aaron has on his mind and is brainstorming in 1926 is very much influenced by the religious groups that he was a part of prior to this. So, you know, she's just wrong about the number here. But of course, like even if you do pick the number, you gotta say way more. But look, there's a succession of leaders. Yeah, are you gonna say that they're from the same family? Say that. They're all Joaquins. Say that, right? Does she even say Nason Joaquin's name here? I don't think so, but okay, right? So they're appointed by God to lead the church in the same way that St. Paul was. Okay. They think that authentic Christianity has been restored. They have a socially conservative lifestyle. They're sometimes compared to the Mormons. I mean, I agree. Okay. I see some similarities in their commitment to community development and mutual aid. I'm even more interested in the substrates that set these groups apart. The community development and mutual aid is existing in like any kind of fucking given church. You know, the fact that LLDM people are showing up with masks and gloves and germ masks and all that stuff, as Westbrook was talking about, this doesn't mean anything either. I feel like this just means anything for anybody. And actually, in all actuality, LLDM knows itself. Its members have known itself and its church and its organization as not being that charitable, as never having someone on site, like running a pantry for the community. That happens at other churches around where I live now. And that's kind of a little bit of a revelation because I was so used to the church never having things like this for members themselves, right? And not you know, there's a lot of things that can happen, and a lot of them are not happening. And even if they were happening, LLDM is not that special, you know. Among other things, you guessed it, the Roman Catholic Church is a much stronger foil in Mexico than in the United States. I mean, yeah, but also, I mean, later you're going to say that there are about 1% of the churches of the Mexican population. LLDM members are 1% of the Mexican population. That's not true. That's not true. Absolutely not true, Holly folk. There's 130 million people. Let's just say there's 100 million people in Guadalajara, in Mexico that are part of the church. 1% of the 100 of this hypothetical 100 million, an undercount of about 30, 40, 50% of the actual population of Mexico. Let's say there's 100 million. 1% of that is a million. Iñegi, a year after you're given this interview here, Iñegi says that there's barely a fifth of a million of LLDM members in Mexico that are part of the church, and a quarter of those are people under 18. But then folk just came into the picture. If she had listened to spokespeople such as Sara Pozos, who in July 2019 was saying on national television, LLDM has 5 million members around the world. Okay, she said that's wrong. She said this video is on this channel. I've talked about this many times. She says that there's 1.8 million members in Mexico. That's not true. That's not true. And 1.8 million is 9 times more than what Iñegi counted, right? The following year in 2020, they counted 200,000, less than 200,000 people. And then here we have Sara Pozos inflating that number by a multiple of 9 and delivering that, and then not being pressed, of course, back then. But then again, in that same summer, someone like Silem Garcia Peña is also saying, yeah, there's 5 million members in the church, and we have 1.5 million members in Mexico. That's not true either. Because if there were, say, even a million members in the church, why are in Mexico that are a part of the church, why are only 600,000 of them showing up to the Santa Cena in like 2019 or so? And then many of those people are from the United States. So many of those people are from the United States. So many of those people are from Central America and southward, right? Overseas, over the Atlantic and over the Pacific. There's so many people at these things. And so, folk just sounds like a stenographer for the church here. Like you may as well just be a part of it, right? Like no one's learning anything here other than if they cite you and you're wrong, well, then they're wrong too. And they're going to hold that ire for you. But here you can just talk all you want about some church that you were just invited to, and you're not going to be very explicit about the kind of abuse that's going on in the church. And then, I don't know, you're just going to chalk it up to, you know what? I lived with some families in a house in Mexico. They're kind. They're sincere people. I hope the court case will get resolved soon. It got fucking resolved, right? And where's your ass? Have you written anything since this? Have you corrected any of this since this? It's been 5 years. So everyone, I think that's all I have to say. I hope that this video is valuable. I'm so sorry for getting worked up about this. I've read this thing multiple times, and it draws the ire because it's so recent, but then also because it just seems so redundant and so inconsequential and just completely lacking substance in all actuality. There are dissertations like Mary Puckett that you will learn a lot more from. Even though this comes before the arrest of the apostle, you will learn a lot more about the church there than you will learn in these things by these academics who are approached by, commissioned by, welcomed by the church. Because the church knows that it's losing a battle, and there's this massive public relations crisis that they have been in for 6 years, and they will continue to stay in. And I'm sorry, if you're drawing in people like this to help clean up your image and launder your reputation and try to attract more people, have members feel a little more special than they actually are, well then this is, if this is what you guys are doing, this is a waste of money. I don't think you guys should be trying to commission more from Introvignes, Cessnur, Holly Folk, however much you've given her, J. Gordon Melton, Westbrook, Tenorio, etc. The Tenorio backtracking, he doesn't believe any of this stuff anymore, right? I'm sure he believes that discrimination happened, but I mean that like he's not defending the church and the apostle in the way that people would want him to. Certain people would want him to. So, no, I think that is all I have to say here. Just give me a second to look through these notes a little bit. That's all I have to say, everybody. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. I hope that this is helpful. I hope that this is not tedious. Please send me comments, questions, concerns, complaints. Let me know if you want access to any of the resources that I am going to share. Let me know if you have any insights into certain material that I would want to handle for my LLDM book. Again, I'm writing, it's like 100 pages. It's super choppy. I'm not going to share this with anybody. I have not shared this with anybody. And if anything, I'm going to share other beneficial resources that I can come up with along the way, rather than this one book that I am writing. And additionally, there's just so much better work out there, and it should be incumbent upon members and upon people like non-members to know that there are better studies out there of the church than stuff like this, because this is just rigmarole. This just does nothing for nobody, and if anything, I really look forward to the next ones, because it might just get uglier, and things will just for sure get way more interesting, and the parsing of the language will get way more amusing to outsiders. So otherwise, take care, everyone. Peace.